Hey guys, Kiwi here. In this video I'll be breaking down every episode of Better Call Saul Season 6 and ranking them in a tier list. Warning spoilers for all of Better Call Saul along with possibly Breaking Bad and El Camino. With that being said, let's quickly hear a word from today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Established Titles. Never before have I been able to call myself a lord, but now I can thanks to Established Titles, and here's why. Established Titles is a fun and novel way to help preserve the natural woodlands of Scotland, as well as helping support global reforestation efforts, and you get a fun new title to add at the beginning of your name. This is because it's a project based on a historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds or lord and ladies in English. Through Established Titles, you can purchase souvenir plots of land in Scotland, which based on historic Scottish customs now gives you the title of Lord or Lady. Lord or Lady is a prefix such as Mr. or Mrs. Due to this, you can officially include the title Lord or Lady on documents that allow for prefixes, such as your credit card, plane tickets, even dating profiles, etc. Title packs give you at least 1 square foot of dedicated land with a unique plot number on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland, and an official certificate with a crest. Established Titles pledges to keep the entire woodland free from any use, and promises to plant a new tree with every order alongside their global charity partners One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts. So not only do you help preserve land in Scotland, but your order directly contributes to planting a new tree somewhere around the world as well. That's quite the positive double whammy. Absolutely love the concept of Established Titles, as it's such a great method to support a good environmental cause in such a way where you also get a hilarious conversational icebreaker out of it. The first 200 people purchasing a title pack using my link will effectively be next to my plot, within a few minutes of walking distance. Depending on how many of you want to become a lord or lady, we can build our own little vivid Kiwi kingdom. It'd also make a great gift for the holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, etc. Being able to surprise friends or family with an official certificate now bestowing upon them with the official title of Lord or Lady. So definitely keep Established Titles in mind for the holidays, since it makes for just such an amazing last minute gift, along with the fact that Established Titles is actually running a massive early Black Friday sale right now. Plus, if you use the code VividKiwi, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/VividKiwi to get your gifts now and help support the channel. Thank you so much to Established Titles for sponsoring this video and supporting my channel. I greatly appreciate it. They're a fun and great cause, so be sure to click their link at the top of the description and show some love and support. With that being said, let's jump right into the video. Season 1, Episode 1. Wine and Roses. The Season 6 premiere is the only season premiere out of the entire show to not start with a Gene scene. That being said, I like how the show tastefully tricks the viewers with the cold open by the first shot of Saul's ties falling into a pile starting out as black and white. Fun fact, they didn't use any special editing for the black and white transition into color. They just first used only black and white ties in the actual shot before switching to colored ties, which is a really interesting way of pulling this shot off. Oh, and real quick, I just wanted to mention that although I'm discussing the episodes chronologically, I will be discussing the significance of certain moments of foreshadowing to later episodes in the season now that the series has concluded, so double spoiler warning just so you all know. So although we had to wait longer for Gene, it was worth it for multiple reasons, not only due to how much Gene we do end up getting at the end of the season, but also because of what they replaced the Season 6 cold open with. The cold open for Season 6 has no dialogue, and instead is a montage of Saul Goodman's Breaking Bad house, set to a rendition of Wine and Roses without lyrics, which was not only the song used for the main Season 6 trailer, but also the name of this episode, and is a representation of the relationship between Jimmy and Kim. Just like with the Season 5 trailer song, I really like how the Season 6 trailer song was implemented into the first episode of the actual season as well. This is also technically our third ever official Breaking Bad flash forward / Breaking Bad missing scene in the series, following the 303 cold open, along with the 405 cold open. As we get shown Saul Goodman's Breaking Bad mansion, we see it being searched and cleared out as some items go in the trash while others get taken away into evidence. In order to film this, the creators apparently got dance choreographers to choreograph the actors walking around and carrying out the items as the camera panned around the house. It's interesting actually seeing the house, or mansion rather, that Saul Goodman lived in during the events of Breaking Bad, since we rarely ever saw Saul Goodman out of his office during Breaking Bad, along with never seeing any of his personal life. Saul owning a mansion actually came from the idea back in 502 when Jimmy took Kim out to a huge house with the idea of one day either buying it together or something just like it. The creators actually originally wanted to use the same house that was in 502, but they weren't able to use it in the way that they would have liked, so they instead had to find a different house to film at. Throughout the cold open, we see many hidden Easter eggs of items and references not only to previous events and situations of Jimmy's life throughout Better Call Saul, but also things foreshadowing the rest of the season, with the creators calling them Priester eggs during all of their insider podcasts. I love the little details like this throughout the show, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of them. The cold open starts out by showing Saul's many colorful ties and suits, and outside Saul's walk-in closet, there's a huge coin above the door frame, which is most likely a reference to the coin scam that Jimmy once did with Marco in the season 1 finale with a Kennedy $50 where his head is facing the wrong way. Inside Saul's walk-in closet, we see a pair of the same sneakers that Jimmy gave to Irene in 309. In his bathroom, we see many prescriptions with them alluding to Saul's hair loss that he experiences throughout the years. We get a glimpse of the Time Machine book by H.G. Wells, which shows up again in 602 in Kim's apartment, along with Chuck revealed to have owned a copy in the series finale. We see that Saul has kept the painting that was in Kim's apartment living room, which has significance throughout the final season for multiple reasons that we'll get to. We also get a glimpse at Saul's white Cadillac DeVille with the iconic Lawyer Up license plate. That's followed by Caldera's coded criminal contact book, which hilariously gets put in the no value box, alongside stress balls from when Jimmy worked at CC Mobile, a few burner phones, the TY beanie that Jimmy tried bribing the receptionist at the courthouse with, and a photo of Olivia Bitsui's that Kevin's father copied as the Mesa Verde logo, as we learned in 506. As a rack of Saul's clothes get taken away, a woman walks by with what I believe is possibly a bag of bingo balls, which may be a reference to Jimmy working bingo nights for the elders in earlier seasons. The Saul Goodman cutout gets taken out of the pool and thrown in the dumpster, which may also be a reference to Gene's fate in the series finale. The cold open ends with a Zafiro Añejo bottle stopper falling out of a dresser and landing on the side of the road. Fun fact, this bottle stopper is apparently all CGI, as it was too difficult to properly make the actual prop fall where they wanted the camera to zoom into, along with the fact that they didn't want to break the prop itself. As you may know, Zafiro Añejo is an infamous brand of alcohol within the Breaking Bad universe, with this particular bottle stopper implied to be Kim's, which she got during her first real con with Jimmy during the season 2 finale. The bottle stopper is symbolism for Kim's love to con with Jimmy, which in turn fueled their relationship. Kim usually held the bottle stopper near and dear to her heart as a souvenir, even keeping it in her desk at work with Schweikart and Coakley as a reminder of her fun with Jimmy. This was the largest Priester egg of them all. Now seeing the bottle stopper that once meant so much to Kim as a representation of her fun times with Jimmy, now abandoned by both of them and dropped on the side of the road by a random mover as if it was meaningless. It's crazy how this now abandoned bottle stopper foreshadowed Kim and Jimmy's breakup and divorce, along with symbolizing the reason why, with Kim wanting to leave behind anything that reminded her of her fun times conning. And we'll discuss this more by the end of the season, but it's interesting how Jimmy kept so many mementos of his past when he actually became Saul Goodman 24/7 to distract himself from thinking of his past. But back in the main timeline, the season 6 premiere picks up right where the season 5 finale left off, which is one thing that I love about this show and will continue to praise it for, which is the fact that they know how to properly handle cliffhangers in the best way. Due to this, we'll first discuss the Nacho and Cartel side of the show. Now after the intro sequence, we pick up with Nacho and his escape from Lalo's compound after letting in Gus's hitmen. Nacho runs for his life until morning breaks and he has to hide from some random civilians. He almost gets spotted by them due to his cell phone ringing, which is revealed to be Tyrus, who tells him to stay out of sight as both the cartel and the feds will be looking for him. Nacho gets told that Lalo is dead, but doesn't receive an answer when he asks if the hitman left the innocent people also living within Lalo's compound alive. This is in reference to Nacho worrying about them when he had his previous phone call with Tyrus during the season 5 finale, when Tyrus warned him about the hit, along with ordering him to let the hitman into the compound in the first place. He didn't get an answer about his concerns then, and since he doesn't get an answer about it again now after the fact, it implies to him that everyone else did in fact get killed too. Nacho continues to hide out from the feds as he makes his way to Motel Ocotillo, where he presumably was told to go by Tyrus off screen. When he arrives, the receptionist seemed to have been waiting for for him as she just instantly gives him a room key without much question. Nacho then finds an envelope inside his room that contains some cash and a gun with a few magazines. Nacho calls Tyrus, who tells him that they're working on a way to get him to safety, but that it'll take a couple days and that in the meantime he needs to stay out of sight and shoot anyone who tries to come through his door. Meanwhile, Lalo's first stop after leaving his compound is to speak to a couple named Sylvia and Mateo, whom he's been providing for as a secret failsafe just for this situation. They think highly of Lalo for providing for them, unaware that Lalo is doing so in case he ever needs a body double to fake his death, which is quite the contingency plan just to have in his back pocket. Part of Lalo's providing for them included getting Mateo's teeth fixed, but in such a way that the dental records will match his own. So Mateo goes to shave, but Lalo tells him to leave his mustache and soul patch because he wants Mateo to resemble him. Mateo takes it as a compliment that Lalo wants him to look like him, unaware that Lalo's about to kill both of them to use him as his body double. While Mateo is shaving in the bathroom, Lalo takes apart some scissors and grabs one side of them. He goes to Mateo, who's just finishing in the bathroom, and it's implied that he killed Sylvia off screen due to there now being a new blood patch on his shoulder. The scene ends with Lalo staring at Mateo, unaware of his own fate, and it's implied that Lalo kills Mateo off screen as well. It's then implied that Lalo was somehow able to take Mateo's body back to his compound to stage his own death before the authorities arrived. In order to do this, Lalo burned most of Mateo's body so that the only recognizable features on his body would be the ones that resemble Lalo, such as his hair, facial hair, and teeth. This is so that when members of the cartel go to identify the body, in this case it's the Salamanca twins, they believe that Lalo is truly dead. Since Lalo is already onto the fact that it was Gus who ordered the assassination attempt on him, he now has tricked the entire cartel, hopefully including Gus, into believing that he is dead. Remember that Lalo told the final hitman alive to report back that the mission to kill him was a success, so placing a fake body at the scene was to further confirm this fact. Lalo believes that everyone thinking he's dead is the only way to gain an advantage against Gus in order to make a counterstrike. Lalo then gets driven to a meetup spot to get smuggled across the border in a truck with hollowed out hay bales in the back, which is a reference to the way that the Salamanca twins were first smuggled into Albuquerque during Breaking Bad. Right before Lalo gets into the back, he decides to make a last-minute phone call to Hector to inform him of the situation and that he's still alive, of course. Lalo tells Hector that it was Gus who tried to kill him, and that he's going to make Gus suffer just like how Hector taught him. Hector instead has a different idea, which Lalo figures out by using the classic method of getting Hector to spell out what he wants to say by ringing his bell as Lalo recites the alphabet. Hector tells Lalo that he needs proof against Gus in order to turn the cartel against him, causing Lalo to change his plans and not go back to Albuquerque, at least not yet. Lalo tells the smugglers that he's not going anymore, but when they refuse to give him his money back, he kills them, takes his money back, and informs the rest of the civilians in the truck that they'll need to find another way north and gives them their money back as well. This is incredibly interesting as it shows both a humane and murderous side of him at the same time. He killed the smugglers, but made sure that the other civilians were okay. It's also interesting how Lalo technically killed 4 people in this episode, with all 4 kills being off screen. Sure, you can hear him shoot the smugglers, but you don't actually see it as the camera is inside the hay bales while it happens, and then we just don't see Sylvia or Mateo's deaths at all. Now our intro to Gus this season shows him waiting in his chicken farm portable meeting room from Breaking Bad as he takes a phone call from Don Bolsa informing him that Lalo is dead and that the Salamancas will want blood for blood. Gus finds out that the cartel has marked Nacho as a rat and that they're on the hunt for him to find out who he was working for. Although Gus himself isn't a main suspect, Bolsa warns him that no one is above suspicion of being involved. Tyrus brings Mike into the portable to discuss how the final hitmen radioed in that their mission against Lalo was a success, yet they all died anyways. Gus finds it incredibly suspicious for all of them to have died while also successfully somehow killing Lalo in the process, with Mike stating that it's been known to happen. Although Gus is focused on his gut feeling that Lalo may still be alive, Mike focuses on bringing Nacho back to Albuquerque alive, continuing his concern for Nacho that he's had throughout Season 5. Mike once again vouches for Nacho just like he did previously in Season 5, but Gus states that although Nacho has his respect, he implies that he has other plans for Nacho. See, it initially seemed like bad planning on Gus's part to leave Nacho as a loose cannon instead of just getting one of the hitmen to escort him back to safety. Why leave Nacho out there with the possibility of getting caught and revealing that Gus was behind the assassination attempt? Gus originally went along with Mike wanting to save Nacho only because Gus thought of a use for him, which was to use him to let the hitman into Lalo's compound. But now Gus is planning on setting up Nacho to double-cross him under the ruse of escorting him to safety in order to use him as a scapegoat for the assassination attempts. Although Mike wants to save Nacho's life, he ultimately knows that it's not his call, just like with Werner, so he doesn't answer his phone the many times that Nacho tries to call him since he doesn't want to go against Gus's plans for Nacho. Now on the Jimmy and Kim side of the episode, we also pick up right where the season 5 finale left off, with Jimmy waking up beside Kim in the hotel that they were staying at in the morning after that they had their ice cream bar while considering ruining Howard in order to force Sandpiper to settle. Potentially going after Howard was the big cliffhanger going into season 6 for Jimmy and Kim, and now we see how it takes full force as their main story for most of this season. They check out of the hotel and return to the apartment to prepare for the day, with Kim now extremely busy with pro bono clients due to taking so many in the season 5 finale. As they're getting ready, Jimmy actually grabs a suit for one of her clients that's the same suit that we saw Jimmy wear back in the pilot episode. When they realize that they don't have any money for a taxi, Jimmy grabs some cash out of the duffel bag containing the payment from his bagman job with Lalo. Kim says nothing to him and just picks up the coffee mug with the bullet hole through it, and then we cut to Kim throwing it out in an outside garbage as they leave their apartment to catch their taxi, which feels like them throwing out evidence, so to speak. This is extremely interesting to ponder what's going through these characters' minds, as there's no dialogue between them here. As I discussed in my season 5 tier list, Jimmy had completely forgotten about how that coffee mug was even still in the duffel bag, which had several important implications near the end of season 5. Kim actually saw it without Jimmy's knowledge due to Jimmy telling Kim to go look at the duffel bag full of money, which is why Kim knew that something more happened in the desert that he wasn't telling her. Here during 601, Jimmy may be realizing that not only was the coffee mug why Kim knew that he was shot at in the desert, but also why Kim stepped in during the 509 Lalo confrontation at the apartment when Jimmy suggested giving the money back to Lalo, as Kim didn't want Lalo seeing the coffee mug in the duffel bag due to the bullet hole proving that Jimmy was actually shot at in the desert like Lalo suspected, which would have totally ruined Kim's excuse that she gave him. Now, as Jimmy and Kim go their separate ways at the courthouse, Jimmy gives Kim his old suit, telling her that he hopes that it brings her client more luck than it did to him, referencing the first 2 episodes of the show, as it was the very same suit that he wore when Tugo kidnapped him and brought him out into the desert. Jimmy tells Kim that he's doing great, which is clearly a lie, as he completely stumbles over his first confrontation of the day, which is with Detective Tim Roberts and 88 Khalil questioning him about his client Jorge de Guzman, which is Lalo's alias from season 5. They confront him over the fact that de Guzman is missing, and Jimmy gets so stirred up thinking about Lalo that he accidentally says Lalo's real name to them, and then afterward he goes and sits in an empty courtroom realizing how much he just dropped the ball and there will be consequences. At the end of the day, Jimmy meets Kim at the El Camino diner, which is definitely a reference to the Breaking Bad movie. Now as Jimmy enters, he walks past Kim's client wearing his suit, complimenting it with the client unaware that it's actually his suit. I just like little side story details such as this, so I thought I'd highlight it for anyone who may have missed it. Kim explains the client's unfair case to Jimmy, which is a complete mess, but even so, Kim says how it was one of the best days of her life. As Kim says this, she corrects herself by clarifying it was one of the best days of her professional life, as she is talking to her husband and doesn't want to unintentionally insult him due to the cliche of the day that someone gets married usually being the best day of their life.
It was one of the best days of my life. My professional life.
I like this moment as it's just another subtle reminder that they are in fact married, since they hardly ever act like a normal married couple, as I said in my season 5 tier list. Anyways, even though Kim's day was a complete mess, it was one of the best days of her professional life, as she was fully able to focus on a handful of new pro bono clients without feeling like Mesa Verde or Rich were breathing down her neck. Kim switches the conversation to Jimmy and gives him a hard time for Saul Goodman driving something so basic. Kim's perspective of Jimmy becoming Saul during the beginning of season 6 has completely switched from her opinions of it during the beginning of season 5, where she's now become fully supportive of it when she was previously reluctant and confused by it. Due to Kim's new acceptance of it, she is now even giving him ideas on what Saul should be like, planting seeds that we eventually see going into the Breaking Bad timeline in regard to Saul driving a flashy car and having a fancy office that she calls the Cathedral of Justice. This is great foreshadowing, hinting at Jimmy's inevitable final transformation into Saul later on in the season, unaware that her eventually leaving him will be the final push for Jimmy to complete that transformation, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Kim then states that she has an idea for their first plan of attack to force Sandpiper to settle, but brings it up in such a way that it's as if Jimmy is already fully on board with her when he's not.
I was thinking about our first move. On the Howard front?
Their conversation at the end of the season 5 finale left Jimmy shocked that Kim would even be okay going down this road while still being able to sleep at night, and they haven't really elaborated on it since. It seems like Kim is almost kind of trying to trick Jimmy into being on board with it by jumping right to the planning stage while skipping the initial conversation about whether or not they're actually going to do it, which is a common tactic to try to rope someone else into a situation before they've even agreed to something yet and or may be reluctant to it. Jimmy admits that he's surprised that they're actually wanting to go through with it, causing Kim to backpedal with the excuse of her having a misunderstanding on where they stood in regard to forcing Sandpiper to settle.
So, we're doing that?
I thought we were. Aren't we? You think we shouldn't?
Well, I didn't say that.
Along with using reverse psychology by saying how Jimmy thinks that they shouldn't. Now, Jimmy doesn't seem to want to go through with it, as he's still reluctant to the idea ever since stating that Howard doesn't deserve to get burned to the ground during their conversation about it during the season 5 finale. That being said, he still goes along with it due to multiple related reasons. He does seem to just go along with it as to not make him upset or disappointed, but there's a lot more to it than that. He obviously loves conning and especially loves doing it with Kim, and he knows that she loves it too now as sort of a guilty pleasure that actually fuels the spark of excitement in their relationship. Ever since season 2, he's been slowly easing Kim more and more into it, so now that she's showing initiative towards it, he doesn't want to back down from it. Within their relationship, Jimmy has always been the one to take things too far, with Kim having to reel him back in. Jimmy's even said this directly in the past.
See? This is why this works. I go too far, and you pull me back.
Due to this, it was rare when Kim would want to initiate a con, so when she did, he would always eagerly jump on it. However, in season 6, the creators have made an interesting change within the dynamic of their relationship, where since Kim is now essentially acting as the mastermind and driving force behind their Sandpiper schemes, she's no longer reeling Jimmy back in the way that she used to, and in ways is doing the complete opposite, wanting to take things even further than Jimmy does, which does make Jimmy feel uncomfortable.
See? This is why this works. You go too far, and I pull you back.
I really like the constantly evolving dynamic between Jimmy and Kim throughout the show, as their characters both go through arcs of their own and alongside each other as a power couple. As they evolve, the show constantly makes me question who might break up with who, when the final straw will be, along with how their power dynamic swaps back and forth by subverting expectations, for example, by having Kim now be the leader of the Sandpiper scheme while Jimmy initially tried reeling her back in when it's usually vice versa.
You go too far, and you go too far.
So Kim tells Jimmy that in order to get to Howard, they should first go through Cliff, Maine, but we don't actually hear them discuss their plan before they execute it, which is a recurring theme not only throughout this season, but the show in general, in order for the audience to obviously, experience their cons and schemes in real time as they happen, as it's more exciting that way. We then see Jimmy and Kim spying on Howard and Cliff playing golf, which should give Jimmy 45 minutes to accomplish his goal of sneaking into the locker room of the clubhouse in order to plant drugs in Howard's locker for him and Cliff to find. While doing so, Jimmy runs into Kevin from Mesa Verde, who instantly wants Jimmy gone due to knowing that Jimmy's never up to any good, along with still being pissed off at him over the events of season 5. When Jimmy realizes that Kevin is telling the host to make him leave, he claims that Kevin is being anti-Semitic against him as his name is Saul Goodman, which isn't the only time that we've heard Saul using his Jewish surname to his advantage. This may actually be a reference to Breaking Bad when Jimmy tells Walt that he just ramps up the Jewish aspect of his name to be more favorable in the eyes of some clients.
Yeah, the Jew thing I just do for the homeboys. They all want a pipe-hitting member of the tribe, so to speak.
Anyways, Jimmy creates a scene by getting Kevin worked up enough that he needs to be pulled away by his friends, and Jimmy uses the situation to his advantage in order to sneak into the locker room under the ruse that he needs to use the bathroom before he leaves. That definitely was some interesting improv that Jimmy does here in order to get what he wants, as his plans changed the moment that Kevin saw him. He was even just going to leave before turning around and purposely causing that scene due to not wanting to return to Kim empty-handed. Viewers also wondered if Kevin witnessing Jimmy at the clubhouse would have any implications or consequences consequences later on in the season, but nothing ever comes of it as this is actually Kevin's final scene in the show. So Jimmy manages to successfully find Howard's locker and plant fake drugs inside of it, but he isn't able to leave in time due to Howard and Cliff unexpectedly ending their golf game early from some complications with a client or something. Kim tries to warn Jimmy, but since he isn't able to escape the locker room in time, he strips down and pretends to be a member of the country club drying off from a shower, which actually works. So even with multiple complications to their plan, it's still a success, with Cliff noticing the drug baggie fall out of Howard's locker, with Howard himself completely confused as to how it would end up there. Note that Cliff says that he's unfortunately been around enough drug baggies to know what they look like, which gets elaborated on during a future episode. Although Jimmy never intended to be in the locker room when it all went down, although it initially seemed like a bad thing due to him almost getting caught, it ended up working out in his favor as he actually got to overhear them finding the drug baggie. This episode gets a strong A tier. It follows what Better Call Saul did great about season premieres in regard to picking up right where the previous season finale cliffhangers left off, along with setting up the future story arcs for the rest of the season. Due to this, the season 6 premiere felt like 50% closure for what happened during the season 5 finale, along with 50% moving forward with the new season 6 story. It was really important for the creators to properly balance these two factors going into season 6. In my opinion, they did a great job. It was incredibly important to get some payoff for the season 5 finale, since fans speculated for 2 whole years what would happen due to the season 5 finale and season 6 premiere airing exactly 2 years apart. At the same time, it was important to also move into new season 6 territory in order to feel like the episode was moving the story forward just as much as it was concluding unanswered questions from season 5. Also, just like with episodes 501 and 502, 601 and 602 aired at the same time as well. Not only did it feel like a gift for the fans after waiting so long for season 6 getting 2 episodes back to back, but it also definitely gave some breathing room for people who may have thought that 601 didn't push the plot along far enough. That being said, in retrospect, I do think that 601 stands on its own 2 feet well, just like 501. When 601 first came out, I originally gave it an A tier ranking, and I'm sticking with it. Now, throughout the rest of this video, I will be re-ranking many of the episodes from the ranks that I gave them in my initial season 6 episode reviews, as I give my opinion of them now in retrospect, since I've had some time to sit back and reflect on the final season of the show after it's concluded. So if you saw my initial season 6 episode reviews as season 6 was airing, prepare for most of my episode rankings throughout this video to be changed, while a few may still stay the same. Season 6 episode 2, Carrot and Stick. This episode starts out with Nacho's girlfriend still living at his house and taking poor care of it while they continue to tweak out. As one of the girls notices men outside the house, she steps on one of the dominoes that the other girl is playing with the domino having a 6 and a 3 on it. Some thought that this domino was foreshadowing Nacho's fate in 603, but the creators actually denied this being intentional, I believe Tom Schnauz specifically. Just another funny moment where fans are connecting dots that were never there in the first place, although the creators have been open in the past to fans recognizing symbolism that they never originally intended, as viewers interpret both shows in different ways. Anyways, Mike arrives and gives the girls money to run away with and tells them never to return again instead of just killing them, as he doesn't want them to die due to being affiliated with Nacho when they aren't in the game themselves. Mike then breaks into Nacho's safe to retrieve the contents inside and then gets Victor to bring in a replacement safe. This is because Gus knows that the cartel will eventually send someone to search Nacho's house, and so he sends Mike to plant evidence in Nacho's safe in order to frame him for working with a rival cartel gang, along with his location at Motel Ocotillo. While doing this, although Mike is reluctantly setting Nacho up, he does act on his own accord by taking the fake ID that Nacho had for his father so that when the cartel opens up the safe themselves, they don't paint Nacho's father as a target. Mike does this not only because he knows that Nacho cares about his father the most, but also because Mike doesn't want to see Nacho's father killed either, since as we know, Mike has a soft spot for people not in the game being killed due to affiliation. Now as Gus oversees the evidence gathered from Lalo's compound, Tyrus tells him that Lalo's body checks out even down to the dental records. With Gus still unsure that Lalo's actually dead, he figures that if Lalo would have told anyone, it would be Hector. So Gus decides to read Hector's body language to try and get an answer if Hector knows whether Lalo is alive or not. In order to accomplish this, he sets up a meeting with Hector through Bolsa under the ruse that he wants to meet up to keep the peace within the cartel. When Gus meets with Bolsa and Hector at Casa Tranquila, tequila, Hector goes to shake Gus's hand as a huge symbol of peace, implying that he believes that Nacho is the traitor and that Lalo is dead. However, Gus can tell that Hector knows that Lalo is alive due to the smug look that Hector had on his face while shaking Gus's hand, both of which Hector would normally never do. Hector thought that he was successfully tricking Gus, but Gus saw right through it. Hector tried pretending that Lalo was dead while giving Gus a backhanded handshake to pretend that he was drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, but Gus could see right through Hector and was able to tell that Hector was so smug due to the fact that he knew that Lalo was alive and working on making moves against Gus. Meanwhile, as Nacho waits in his motel room, he becomes sketched out at someone knocking on his door, but discovers that it's just the receptionist of the motel bringing him food. As he eats his food, he notices a man outside having smoke and is drawn to a building across the street with a hole in one of the boarded up windows that's large enough to be peeked through. Nacho also notices how the air conditioning to that building is running, implying that someone is inside. Now back at Nacho's house, it's revealed to be ransacked by Bolsa and his men, who are able to successfully break into the replacement safe left by Mike, and they find the envelope also left by Mike that incriminates Nacho as a traitor, along with telling the cartel of his current location. Nacho, paranoid that he's being watched, waits until the next time that he's delivered food, and then uses grabbing it as an opportunity to deduce that he is in fact being watched. As he creaks open his door, he watches the peek hole in the other building for a movement and sees some. He then grabs his food while pretending to be unaware that he's being watched, but when he goes back inside, he throws the food in a fit of rage. Now, fun fact, the person that was filmed as the movement at the peek hole was actually Vince Gilligan himself, making this the closest to a Vince cameo that we ever saw on either show. Nacho thinks about calling Tyrus or Mike, but he's worried that he's being double-crossed, so he decides to handle the situation himself. He sneaks out the back of his room by forcing out his air conditioner and crawling through the hole and sneaks into the other building, holding the spy at gunpoint. I love the way that Nacho handles the situation and proves that Gus has double-crossed him. Nacho first listens to the spy pleading for his life as he states that he doesn't know who he works for, that he's just paid to watch people such as police and the cartel, that he doesn't even know Nacho's name. Nacho then calls Tyrus, stating how he feels like something's off and that he's going to leave and find his own way across the border. He does this to see if Tyrus calls the spy, because if he does, it confirms that the spy is working for Gus and not Don Eladio or the Salamancas. Then, right on cue, the spy's phone rings and confirms to Nacho that he has been betrayed. As he leaves, he knocks out the spy instead of killing him, which may be for multiple reasons. First, maybe he agrees with the spy saying that Nacho can't shoot him due to the gunshot being too loud, or maybe Nacho just doesn't want to kill someone that he doesn't have to and just takes a half measure by knocking out the spy to spare his life instead of killing him. If it's the latter, then maybe it feels like some of Mike's morals have rubbed off on Nacho ever since Nacho was surprised at Mike never pulling the trigger back in season 2. Just as Nacho goes to steal a truck to leave, the actual cartel just so happens to arrive at that moment alongside the Salamanca twins due to being tipped off by the planted envelope that Bolsa found in Nacho's duplicate safe. So obviously the reason why Tyrus didn't want Nacho to leave is because he wanted Nacho to stay at the motel for the cartel to find and kill him. So gunfire breaks out and Nacho manages to take out one gunman, while one of the Salamanca twins actually shoots the other guy firing his gun at Nacho, effectively killing his own man, as the Salamancas want to capture Nacho alive. It's interesting seeing Nacho versus the Salamanca twins in a shootout during season 6 after seeing the three of them fight alongside each other during their season 4 shootout. Oh, how the tables have turned. It sure was great having them on your side, but facing off against them is always very scary. I remember this being quite an epic shootout, having such a showdown between Nacho and the Salamanca twins, but now it feels almost like a mini boss fight before the main boss that is Nacho's ultimate fate next episode. The way that Nacho faces off against them and manages to barely escape is epic, but it feels a bit plot armory the way that Nacho drives right at them while shooting at them. The way that the Salamanca twins show no fear is awesome, but unrealistic, as they could have easily been shot or run over there. Also, even though they didn't want to kill Nacho, it's crazy how Nacho thought that he could just drive through them and get away and not get killed or shot. It's almost like they gave Nacho plot armor for this episode because they knew that they wanted to kill him off at the end of the next episode instead. And of course, the twins have plot armor due to being in Breaking Bad. It also feels like they just wanted some major action to conclude the first 2 episodes, so they possibly wanted a gunfight and figured that throwing one in as Nacho escaped would be a great point to do so, which I do agree. It's still an intense shootout, but overall falls flat due to there not being much consequence from it. Back at Gus's portable, Mike has a friendly sniper watching over them in case they get attacked, while Tyrus updates Gus on the shootout between Nacho and the twins. We hear that the Salamancas found the truck that Nacho escaped in, but that they haven't found him. This is essentially Gus learning that his plan to have Nacho killed in a gunfight against the Salamancas at the motel didn't work, and that Nacho is back to being a loose cannon. We then hear Tyrus state how, as far as the cartel is concerned, Lalo is dead, and that there hasn't been any word of him. Mike brings up the fact that if Lalo is alive, he's not gunning straight for Gus, as he would have been there already. As we know, this is true, as that was Lalo's original plan until Hector convinced him to get proof against Gus first. Mike then tells Gus that he has guys watching anywhere that Lalo might turn up, along with wiretaps on phones that Lalo might call, both of which come into play later on in the season, so put a pin in those details for now. Mike then correctly deduces that Lalo is probably trying to search for incriminating evidence against Gus to bring to Don Eladio in order to turn the cartel against him, but incorrectly assumes that Lalo is searching for Nacho. I kinda wish this is the case, but sadly it's not, and more on that in a little bit as well. Mike uses this assumption to once again suggest going down to Mexico to bring Nacho to safety, but as he does so, Gus accidentally knocks over a glass, breaking it. Gus breaking the glass is an obvious symbolism of how broken Gus's plans now are, with both attempts to kill Lalo and now to double-cross Nacho failing. Never before have we seen Gus in such a mess. Usually he's always 5 steps ahead of everyone, but here his plan is shattered and he's trying to pick up the many pieces implied by him cleaning up the broken glass. Although the metaphor may be a bit too on the nose, I do like it. Ever since Gus returned in season 3, Giancarlo Esposito explained how he was excited to reprise his role due to playing a younger Gus that maybe wasn't as put together as he was during Breaking Bad. Due to this, Gus in Better Call Saul is more prone to acting out or making mistakes that he never would have during Breaking Bad, along with showing the evolution of how Gus became as professional and calculated as he is in Breaking Bad. This whole situation with Gus's plans crashing down around him and him being in the worst place that we've ever seen him in is a great representation of what Giancarlo always wanted to bring to the character for this show. So as Gus drops the broken glass pieces into the trash, which comes into play next episode, Gus tells Mike to bring Nacho's father to the portable as a hostage to assure that Nacho won't talk in case he's caught. Mike puts his foot down and denies this happening, causing Tyrus to instantly take his gun out. Mike locks the door to the portable and then doubles down on his assertion, causing Tyrus to point his gun at Mike. It's so interesting to see how Tyrus appears to be more of a loyal right-hand man than Mike to Gus in Better Call Saul, when during Breaking Bad it ends up being the other way around. We then get the iconic line of Mike saying,
"Whatever happens next, it's not gonna go down the way you think it is."
Which is a line famously taken out of context during the airing of season 6, as it pretty much accurately describes the entire final season in a nutshell. Although we all knew none of these 3 characters were going to die due to them all being Breaking Bad characters, this is still a great moment. Sometimes you don't need life or death stakes to make a scene interesting, just the simple fact that Mike was having such a disagreement with Tyrus and Gus made it incredibly intriguing to see how they would sort this all out. Also, ever since Werner, Mike has known that certain things aren't his call. He even stepped aside when Gus wanted to double-cross Nacho, but Nacho's father is where Mike finally draws the line, I guess. So as Mike is held at gunpoint, he conveniently gets a phone call from Nacho. Tyrus's reaction is what some viewers thought, but not for the same reason.
It's him.
Bullshit.
See, Tyrus thinks that it's BS because he's been calling Nacho constantly and Nacho hasn't picked up. That actually makes sense due to the fact that Nacho knows that Gus and Tyrus betrayed him, and the reason why he keeps calling Mike instead is because Mike is the only person on Gus's side that Nacho can put an ounce of trust into at this point. So the reason why some viewers may have had a problem with this is because even though we did know that Nacho was repeatedly trying to call Mike, it was still quite the coincidence for Nacho to call at that exact time, almost feeling like a Deus Ex Machina to get Mike out of this standoff. Although I partly agree with the Deus Ex Machina feeling from all of this, I still like the standoff concluding with an intense cliffhanger phone call from Nacho. Speaking of which, the cartel side of the episode ends with Gus allowing Mike to answer it, followed by Mike telling Gus that Nacho wants to speak to him directly. On the Jimmy and Kim side of the episode, they continue to try to convince Cliff that Howard is a drug addict in order to ruin his reputation and their friendship. We first see Jimmy rehearsing a monologue that they're brainstorming as part of their plan to have Cliff accept a meeting for a phony injury case so that he overhears an anecdote about Howard being on drugs, which further builds on their scheme last episode, stashing fake drugs in Howard's locker. They realize that they need someone with a sweet spot of a history with Howard that's good but not too good, with something that Cliff will want to take the meeting for but not the case. This is where Jimmy realizes that the perfect candidates are the Kettlemans, which continues the season 6 trend of the creators bringing back many side characters to give them a victory lap of sorts. 601 had Kevin, while 602 to as the Kettlemans, along with Cliff returning as a predominant side character for the first half of the season as well. So Jimmy goes to speak to the Kettlemans, who are working at Sweet Liberty Tax Service in a small trailer just outside of town now that Craig has been released from prison. As Jimmy arrives, he notices a huge inflatable Statue of Liberty, foreshadowing the one on top of Saul's Breaking Bad office. Also, when this episode first aired, there was a theory that the client Betsy is finishing up helping as Jimmy walks in is the same man that sells Walt his truck in Ozymandias, as we can see a very similar truck outside parked next to Jimmy before he walks in. Just like with the 603 Domino at the beginning of the episode, Tom Schnauz also confirmed this to be unintentional as well. Aside from the fact that these two characters are played by different actors, the trucks being similar was apparently a complete coincidence. Another notable detail is the fact that when Betsy prints out a bank check for the client, it shows the current date, which is May 23rd, 2004. I always appreciate the creators including dates within the show for the timeline, as they make sure that it is accurate within the show. The creators dedicated a few writers to do their homework on previous seasons of both shows to create their own Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul timeline. This is not only so they can make sure that everything lines up logically, but also so that if there are any documents shown on screen that need dates, that they actually line up with the events of the show. It's just another fun fact that I really like that shows how much effort these creators put into this show, which other creators wouldn't necessarily do for other shows. Anyways, when Betsy notices Jimmy entering, she quickly finishes up with her client and then demands that Jimmy leaves with a face full of hatred that only Betsy could pull off. We get a hilarious moment that I love of her threatening to have Craig throw Jimmy out, but when she calls him, he seems happy to see Jimmy, completely oblivious to Betsy's hatred towards him.
Get out.
Mr. McGill. Oh, good to see you.
Most birds are they?
Betsy ends up shoving Jimmy out the back door to speak privately with him and Craig, as there were still other customers inside that Craig was helping. Betsy stays true to her character, playing the victim of her own actions and instead blaming Jimmy for the consequences. During this, we hear just how delusional Betsy is by how tragic she thinks her life is now that she thinks that she's lost everything, which we'll put a pin in for now, but I will acknowledge how offended she seems to be at the idea that she can't afford to send her kids to private schools anymore.
Because of you, we lost everything. Our kids are in public school.
She's acting as if they're living on the streets. Jimmy tells them that he can help exonerate Craig of his crimes, but the Kettlemans admit that they already went to many lawyers and were unable to make a case. When Craig is explaining this, Betsy adds that they saw real lawyers, implying that Jimmy isn't one. This is not only a reference to Chuck once telling Jimmy that he's not a real lawyer,
You're not a real lawyer.
but also references the prejudice that Betsy had against Jimmy during the first season for being a lawyer that only guilty people hire.
You're the kind of lawyer guilty people hire.
Considering that both of those insults have stuck with Jimmy throughout the years, he takes this fairly well and doesn't let it faze him. Instead, he tells them that the other lawyers don't know what he knows, but in order for him to tell them, he first needs them to sign a letter of engagement so they won't take the information to competing lawyers, and while saying this, he intentionally name drops Cliff, planting the seeds of his reverse psychology magic that he's manipulating them with. Jimmy trying to get them to sign a letter of engagement is also a nice callback to when he tried getting them to sign one in the pilot episode, with many shots being similar if not the exact same. From Jimmy taking out the paper, Betsy stopping Craig from signing it, along with the way that Jimmy even takes out and clicks his pen. This could also be why Jimmy knew that his reverse psychology would work, as they had already betrayed him in his eyes once before by hiring HHM instead of him in the past. After they deny signing it, Jimmy walks away, allowing them to ponder over it, and this manages to reel them right back in just like he planned, shown by the anticipation he has waiting for them to run around the corner chasing after him. After they sign, Jimmy has to continuously drop more and more obvious hints as to what he's getting at due to the Kettlemans being too oblivious to pick up on what he's implying, resulting in another hilarious line from Betsy as she confuses his implication of Howard with Kim.
That awful woman with the ponytail is a cocaine addict.
No, not Kim Wexler, no. Craig's lead attorney, Howard Hamlin.
Oh.
As much as the Kettlemans annoy me, they were created in such a brilliant way that you can obviously tell how they're purposely written to be so over the top, with the actors being able to pull them off perfectly due to having such great chemistry together. As a result, we get quite a few amazingly subtle yet comedic moments out of them, both in season 1 and in 602 during their return, that I really love. To continue the thought of the creators bringing back many side characters in the final season, the Kettlemans are a great example of how the creators are able to write these returning characters in such a way that does them them justice by not only staying accurate and true to themselves, even when some haven't been seen in quite some time, but also since they're implemented into season 6 in a way that pushes the current story forward. Due to this, their returns feel like they have a point to them instead of just feeling like they're back for the sake of it. Anyways, after Jimmy tells them the information about Howard being on drugs while representing Craig, they fire him. Jimmy pretends to put up a fuss about it when in reality it's exactly what he wanted, hoping that they'll go to Cliff with this false information, which is exactly what we see next. Now, speaking of cameos, we get the first of multiple appearances this season from Aaron Brill, who informs Cliff as he's playing guitar that she has the Kettlemans waiting to see him, which is a nice callback to how Cliff would play the guitar during season 2. As a side note, we get more hilarious dialogue that I love, this time between Cliff and Aaron. First, there's the line of Cliff as he mispronounces the Kettleman's last name while trying to remember who they are.
Kettlebell?
Kettleman. Craig Kettleman.
Yes.
And then there's Aaron explaining how the Kettlemans described her.
We didn't get into the details. They said they wanted to talk to someone in charge, and I'm just a, quote, prepubescent intern.
Cliff meets with the Kettlemans, who accuse Howard of doing blow while representing Craig, but in a hilariously incompetent way, which assures that Cliff won't take the case.
All his drug purchases, his drug associates, all of that gets on the record during discovery. Yeah.
Okay.
This, of course, is exactly what Jimmy and Kim wanted, for the Kettlemans to relay suspicions about Howard doing drugs to Cliff, but in such a way that Cliff wouldn't want to take their case. That being said, after the Kettlemans leave, Cliff picks up his guitar, but he's unable to play, implying that the news that the Kettlemans told him about Howard really is getting to him. This reminds me a lot of episode 202, when Chuck went back to play his piano after speaking with Howard, but he was unable to due to the information about Jimmy now working at Davis and Maine bothering him. Also, a funny Easter egg within this scene of the Kettlemans meeting with Cliff is the fact that Craig is preparing a cup of coffee during this whole scene, but they leave before he can ever take a sip. The creators admitted that this is part of a running gag where Craig can never seem to actually take a sip of his drink during meetings. That night, while Jimmy is preparing to see Judge Papadumian in the morning, he gets a call from Betsy freaking out over how they went to see Cliff, but that he didn't bite. Jimmy explains how he didn't advise them to speak to Cliff and tells them to meet in person the next morning. Kim admits that she's surprised that it took them this long and then offers to go speak to the Kettlemans with Jimmy. Kim wants Jimmy to use the stick, aka put the fear in them by threatening them with blackmail, but Jimmy wants to use the carrot, aka bribing them. Also, as a fun little Easter egg, this is the scene in 602 where we see the H.G. Wells Time Machine book that we saw in 601 and we'll see Chuck with in the series finale. So the next day, as the episode title implies, they go to the Kettlemans as the carrot and the stick. Kim waits for Jimmy to try and give them the carrot, but if that doesn't work, she's gonna have to give them the stick as their backup plan. When they arrive outside, Jimmy compliments the inflatable, kinda nailing that one home, and jokes about how the mighty have fallen, alluded to the Kettlemans' current situation working at the small tax service. The Kettlemans are surprised to see Kim, but they're told that since they're married, anything that they can say in front of Jimmy, they can say in front of Kim. Again, a nice subtle nod to the fact that they're now married, along with using the core reason as to why they even got married in the first place, or at least the excuse for it, which is obviously spousal privilege. Betsy starts venting about how they went to 4 legitimate lawyers, again throwing that one in Jimmy's face, and that they all said the same thing, and they call out Jimmy for using them to try to ruin Howard's reputation, which honestly, I'm kinda surprised that Betsy even figured out that Jimmy was trying to use them to tear Howard down. I love how Kim just nonchalantly sits down while listening to Jimmy try to dangle the carrot in front of them, almost comically waiting and anticipating for his method to fail so that she can take a crack at it. The Kettlemans don't accept Jimmy's bribe and instead try forcing him to exonerate Craig by blackmailing Jimmy with the knowledge that he's trying to ruin Howard's reputation. The writers definitely wanted Jimmy in a losing position against the Kettlemans just so Kim could swoop in and save the day, which kinda reminds me of her saving the day against Lalo in 509, but I digress, and yeah, that's exactly what happens. Once Betsy starts giving a sob story about how horrible their lives are now, and how they want everything back to how it was before Craig was sentenced for stealing all that money, Kim states that she's had enough, declaring enough carrot. Kim calmly starts using their landline, with Craig hilariously telling Kim how to do so. Kim then calls a supposed employee that she knows well from the IRS and vaguely threatens to turn in the Kettlemans for tax preparer fraud. She tells Betsy that she'll do 24 months, 18 if she's lucky, but tells Craig that since this isn't his first offense, they'll want to make an example out of him. As Kim's phone call gets successfully transferred, Betsy rushes to hang up and begs Kim that they'll do anything.
We'll do anything. Just tell us.
Why would I believe you?
Kim tells them to give back everything they've stole to their clients and to forget they ever heard Howard's name, and then ends with a complete mic drop that I just have to show you.
You think you've lost everything? You have no idea.
I love how Kim takes their sob story and spits it in their face. What a crazy moment. And all while Jimmy is just standing there in the corner almost ashamed or embarrassed of the way that Kim is just ruthlessly handling the Kettlemans. As I said in 601, usually Jimmy's the one that takes things too far, with Kim always needing to reel him back, but now in season 6 the tables have turned, with Kim as the wolf and Jimmy just reluctantly following behind her.
See? This is why this works.
Speaking of which, the episode ends with a freaking awesome callback to the Wolves and Sheep flashback of Jimmy as a kid from season 2. Once Jimmy eventually gets back to the car, Kim confronts him on giving the Kettlemans the bribe anyways. All Jimmy says in response is wolves and sheep, which confirms how he still remembers that childhood flashback memory that he had of the con man in his dad's store, and how that was a major life lesson for him that has stuck with him every day since. Honestly, considering the something and something titles throughout most of season 6, such as Wine and Roses, Carrot and Stick, etc, etc, I'm genuinely surprised that they never named an episode Wolves and Sheep. Kinda seems like a missed opportunity in my opinion. I'm a little disappointed that never happened, but I digress. Jimmy saying at the end of 602 was still a nice touch. Oh, and as a fun side note, during Kim's call to the IRS, it was a fan theory that maybe she wasn't actually calling the IRS and that it was just Jimmy's camera crew on the other side, because it seemed awfully convenient the way that all went down, but I feel like if they would have staged it, then they would have shown the camera crew. But what do you think? Oh, also, as Jimmy and Kim drive away from the Kettlemans, we see someone following them. Ooh, who could it be? Well, we'll obviously be discussing that more in just a few moments, but in retrospect, it's funny how no one was able to call it, considering that a major hint implying who it could be was dropped during dialogue in this episode.
We've got guys watching anywhere he might turn up this side of Mexico.
But put a pin in that for now, as it doesn't come to fruition for a few episodes. But as far as 602 goes, this episode gets a strong A tier. I really enjoy everything with the Kettlemans this episode, and I think their return is criminally underrated as one of the many great moments of this final season, since it happened so early on in the season, along with us all being so invested in the Nacho plot during this time. Speaking of the Nacho plot, I do love the way that he's able to figure out that he's been double-crossed, and the Salamanca twin standoff is still pretty cool, even barring some of my complaints. When I originally saw this episode, I rated it an S tier, so although I still enjoy this episode a lot, it's just not quite as much anymore as I did during my first impression of it. Although I enjoy the Kettlemans a lot, I feel like what bumped this episode up from an A to an S tier during my initial viewing was because of that huge shootout at the end of the double season 6 premiere night. It had been 2 years since new Better Call Saul had aired, and it was a hype moment. But in retrospect, the excitement of the shootout has faded away a tad, as I do have some minor complaints with it, as I stated earlier. That being said, and it picks a side, it's still a great episode, which is why even though I'm demoting it from an S tier, it's still a solid A tier episode. Season 6 episode 3, Rock and Hard Place. Okay, so wow, this episode, where do I begin? Regardless of how much I love this episode, I'm never prepared enough to rewatch it. Normally I like to discuss the episodes as chronologically as possible, but due to the way that this episode begins and ends, I feel like I need to mention the ending before I can go into the episode and analyze all the foreshadowing leading up to it, which seems a little unorthodox for me to do, but as I said at the beginning of 601, there will be certain times where I'll want to discuss the foreshadowing with full context, now that we have the knowledge of how the series has concluded. So yeah, this is the episode where Nacho dies. It's an absolutely insane episode that builds and builds with tension until the end with a crazy climax to Nacho's story. It's an incredible ride filled with adrenaline and emotion during the first viewing, and then with rewatches you see it from a completely different perspective now knowing how Nacho's fate ends. Take probably the biggest example of this, the cold opening to the episode. Many times during this season we'll see a cold open showing a mysterious scenario with significance that foreshadows something that we don't know yet, but we'll come to learn by the end of that given episode. We'll discuss them as they come, but I believe that 603 does this the best out of all of them, and here's why. The episode starts with a seemingly random shot of the desert as the camera pans down to the ground and starts panning across it as it starts raining, while the camera reveals a blossoming blue flower, followed by some cut zip ties, along with a randomly broken shard of glass. So in order to analyze this, let's discuss what we see in the opposite order that we see them in, starting at the end and working our way backward. So first off, the rain obviously implies that a storm is coming, foreshadowing Nacho's death. And in fact, this whole cold open is almost poetic of sorts. The broken shard of glass is actually a piece of the glass that Gus broke and then threw out in the last episode. Nacho found a shard of this while alone in the portable and used it to cut his restraints during the climax of the episode, which are the zip ties that we also see in the cold open. By doing this, he was able to stab Bolsa in the leg with the glass in order to distract him long enough to take his gun from him and hold him hostage. This of course resulted in Nacho taking his own life, which is represented by the blue flower. The spot that the cold open pans to is the exact spot where Nacho dies, with the shard of glass and cut restraints being the remnants left behind from the events of his death. In a way, the blue flower could be symbolism for Nacho himself, as the blue flower is the only thing alive within the entire area surrounding it. Due to this, the blue flower feels like a diamond in the rough or a needle in a haystack, kind of like Nacho, a glimpse of purity consumed and surrounded by death and destruction that is the criminal underworld. It's just great symbolism and foreshadowing of what's to come that was incredibly ominous the first time I saw it, perfectly setting the tone for the entire episode, while also making a second rewatch that much more meaningful from the moment you start rewatching it. Now, this blue flower has become so popular within the fandom that there's a lot of fan art and fan photoshops of this blue flower, such as the blue flower being placed beside Mike as he dies in Breaking Bad, along with another fan art that I'll try to find and put on screen that I like so much that I still have it as my phone's lock screen. Now, after the intro sequence, we pick back up with Nacho escaping the shootout from the last episode in the truck that he stole, but it stops working fairly quickly due to being so beat up and shot at, so he has to get out. Nacho's decision making is questionable here, as he initially tries making a stand at the truck, but then realizes that he'd be better off just making a run for it. He runs out into the nearby field and then hides in an abandoned oil tanker, requiring him to completely submerge himself in the gross oil inside as one of the twins searches it. One of the gunmen notices something down the road, drawing their attention away from the tanker and inadvertently saving Nacho. Now, to be honest, I feel like Nacho should have just kept running through the field and into the tree line instead of going into the oil tanker. Maybe there wouldn't have been enough time, maybe they would have still seen him running away, I don't know. It was a pretty cool scene, and the set designers or props department, whatever, did a great job making the oil texture just look so realistic. So Nacho camps out in the oil tanker until nightfall, and then he makes his way to the closest building he can find with a hose so he can wash all the oil off of him. This turns out to be a mechanic shop, and when the mechanic notices Nacho, he actually helps him by giving him a cloth to clean off, clothes to change into, along with allowing him to use his phone, but he denies any money that Nacho tries giving him as he doesn't want to be affiliated with whatever mess Nacho's in. Nacho uses the phone to first call his father to see if he's okay. Nacho knows that he's been labeled a rat, so he must have been worried that they would have tracked down his father, but that hasn't happened as Mike made sure to remove the fake ID for Nacho's father, along with denying Gus's wishes to use him as a hostage. Nacho speaking to his father one final time gives brilliant closure to their family relationship, as Nacho speaks to him while being unable to express how he truly feels. He can't let his father know how much trouble or danger he's in, as he knows that the truth would just put his father in danger. So while he speaks to his father just thinks it's another generic phone call, disappointed that Nacho is still a criminal, not realizing the severity of the situation, and that this is actually their last time ever speaking to each other. It truly is a heartbreaking and heartwarming scene at the same time, as Nacho is just happy to hear his father's voice, while his father seems jaded to the conversation, just naively telling Nacho that he has to go to the police if he's in trouble, and implying that he'd rather get back to his work than continue talking. I just love all the different levels of subtext to this final call between them. Nacho also goes through a wide range of emotions, from anxiety while worrying about his father, relief that he's okay, the love that he has for his father, followed by depression knowing that this may be the final time they'll ever speak, along with the sadness of trying to hold in his tears while not being able to tell his father what's truly going on. Michael Mando does a brilliant job here portraying this whirlwind of emotions that Nacho goes through in this moment while having to bottle it all up so he doesn't seem suspicious. Next, Nacho decides to call Mike to confront him on the fact that Gus has betrayed him, and this syncs us back up to the standoff between Mike, Tyrus, and Gus where we left them in the end of the last episode. I love how 602 shows the aftermath of the motel shootout from Mike and Gus's perspectives as they learn what happened, and then 603 we go back in time to actually see it all from Nacho's perspective. For example, in 602 we heard that the Salamancas found the truck that Nacho escaped in, but that they couldn't find Nacho himself, and now in 603 we see how that all went down with Nacho hiding in the oil tanker. We then see what Nacho was doing in the meantime, which was, finding a place to clean up and use a phone. I also like the mini subversion when Nacho first uses the phone, as you may initially think that he's going to just call Mike, when he actually calls his father first and then Mike, which is interesting considering that during the phone call with his father is the exact moment when Gus wanted Mike to bring Nacho's father to the portable as a hostage. Anyways, we sync up with Mike's phone call with Nacho and this time actually hear what Nacho's saying, which includes him being understandably angry over Gus double-crossing him, along with giving Mike a hard time for not doing anything when he knew. This syncs up with Mike saying that it wasn't his call, to which Nacho asks if Gus is with Mike while insulting him and asks to speak to him. Now that we're all caught up, the conversation continues with Nacho explaining to Gus how he knows that Gus needs him to die and that he'll agree to give himself up while making sure to stick to whatever cover story Gus wants, but under one condition, that his father remains unharmed. It's almost like Nacho had a sixth sense gut feeling that Gus was about to immediately go after his father. Granted, Nacho's father being in danger due to affiliation makes sense in general due to Nacho now being a loose cannon rat, along with the fact that both Hector and Gus have threatened Nacho's father in the past, but it's just the fact that Nacho calls Mike to save his father from Gus right as Gus is considering kidnapping his father is pretty damn good timing. So Gus gives Nacho his word that as long as Nacho does what Gus wants, that his father won't be harmed, and Mike vouches for this as he'll protect Nacho's father with his own life. As the episode would imply, Nacho is truly stuck between a rock and a hard place here. He knows that he can't run away as his father won't want to run away with him, and he can't run away without his father as his father will be hurt, so the only option he has is to sacrifice himself in order to save his father. It's a very noble and selfless act. So Nacho leaves the mechanic shop to be brought back to Albuquerque, and when the mechanic notices that Nacho's gone, he finds Nacho's oil-covered money that the mechanic initially denied. Nacho could have left it as a thank you to the mechanic for helping him, along with the fact that Nacho doesn't need money where he's going. However, there are legitimate reasons why the mechanic denied the money. The money is both literally and metaphorically dirty. I don't think that the mechanic just denied the money in the first place just to be nice, but to protect himself from affiliation with whatever Nacho was involved with. In a way, leaving that money for the mechanic could be used as proof that Nacho was there, so if the cartel ever found out, they could kill the mechanic for it. Granted, the cartel never realizes that Nacho hid in that oil tanker, they never trace Nacho back to the mechanic shop or using his phone, all the fact that we never see this mechanic again. So it's safe to say that the mechanic ended up alright, but still, leaving that money there could have been bad news for him, even if it was left there with good intentions. So Nacho gets smuggled back into Albuquerque by hiding in the floor of a Los Pollos truck, which is the same way that we've seen drugs smuggled during earlier seasons. Mike then gives Nacho one final meal, but makes him use a plastic knife and fork as they don't want to give him any sort of weapons. This was the creator's way of trying to prevent a plot hole, because why would Nacho need to steal the shard of glass later on if he was just given a real knife and fork? Anyways, Victor comes in to ruin the party by stating how Nacho needs to look beaten up in order to make his capture look legitimate, but Mike sends Victor away saying that he'll do it himself. Mike seems very upset with the fact that Nacho is forced to die for Gus, so he takes great offense at Victor even coming down to want to beat up Nacho in the first place. Mike just told Nacho that he'll die the next day, so this seems like insult to injury. Nacho wants to get the beating over with, but Mike first pours them each a shot of alcohol, not only to help numb the pain, but also as a sign of mutual respect. The way that Mike views Nacho, along with the way that he feels about and handles Nacho's fate, really makes me view the way that Mike warms up to Jesse during Breaking Bad differently. Also, in a way, Jesse got the opportunity to restart his life, which Nacho never got. That night, Gus meets Mike and Nacho at his portable to go over the finalization of their plans for the next day. They want Nacho to blame a rival gang and then attempt to run, in which Victor will shoot Nacho in the back of the head and kill him instantly instead of allowing Nacho to be tortured by the Salamancas. As Gus goes to leave, Mike follows him outside, asking to go to the meeting as well in order to watch from a distance with his sniper rifle. I think that Mike wants to be there more so to watch over Nacho than anything, but explains it under the ruse that he'll be there to help Gus as an assurance that everything goes as planned. While Nacho is inside the portable alone, it gives him the opportunity to grab that glass shard from the glass that Gus broke in the previous episode. Nacho wasn't actively looking for a weapon to steal, he actually came across the glass by chance due to just so happening to take a glance at the trash can while he's having a drink of water. The creators initially wanted to actually show a scene of Nacho picking up a glass shard, but they didn't want it to spoil the climax of the episode too much, along with foreshadowing from the cold opening, so that's why we instead just see the reflection of Nacho in the broken shards of glass as he looks in the trash. Due to this, it actually caused more initial confusion with the viewers, but I guess it's better to be more vague than more direct if they're trying not to spoil anything. Nacho also only has this opportunity to grab the glass shard due to how shaken up Gus has been over the past few days from his plans constantly failing. If Gus was in his right state of mind, he probably wouldn't have allowed Nacho to be alone in that portable, or would have at least thought to empty the garbage before sending Nacho there to make sure that there's no weapons for Nacho to take, but since Gus is so flustered with the current situation, he didn't think about the possibility of Nacho stealing a glass shard where he normally probably would have thought to prevent it. We then cut to everyone driving out to the desert the following morning as they drop Mike off at his sniper perch before bringing Nacho to the meeting spot with the Salamancas. As Mike gets out, he stares at Nacho one final time as an unspoken goodbye, and then they go their separate ways. As Mike gets up on his sniper perch, it turns out to be the exact same spot that Mike went to in the season 2 finale when he initially brought his sniper to try and take out Hector. Likewise, the actual meeting spot is at that same small shack in the middle of the desert that Mike saw the Salamancas bring their truck driver out to during the season 2 finale as well. I just really like this callback to season 2, it makes everything feel like it's coming full circle. Back in season 2, Mike had the chance to shoot Hector, but he would have had to shoot through Nacho to do so, so he didn't. Since Mike never took that shot, now he has to watch Nacho willingly die in front of Hector. Also, although Nacho does end up dying here, every single other character at this meeting eventually dies during Breaking Bad, even including Mike. So in a way, even though Nacho dies, he was only the first domino to fall, as everyone else at this meeting would eventually die years later as well. Kind of a grim but interesting detail that I do really like thinking about. So Gus, Tyrus, and Victor bring Nacho to Bolsa, Hector, and the Salamanca twins. Bolsa tells Nacho that he's going to die today, but that it's up to him if he wants a quick death or a slow and painful one. When Bolsa asks Nacho who put him up to this, Nacho first stares at Gus, giving tension as Nacho could totally just screw over Gus right now and admit that it was him, and as Nacho hesitates, the camera cuts to his restrained hands bleeding, showing that Nacho has something sharp in his hands that he's clenching with frustration, or maybe trying to, cut his restraints with. Instead of giving up Gus, Nacho gives Bolsa the cover story that Gus wants in order to protect his own father. Although it was interesting to tease the idea of Nacho giving up Gus, we all knew that it wasn't going to happen because if the cartel knew that Gus was behind Lalo's assassination attempt, there'd be no way that Gus would still be working alongside the cartel the way that he is during Breaking Bad. Anyways, Hector doesn't believe Nacho's cover story and instead accuses Gus of being at fault due to knowing that Lalo is actually still alive. Nacho laughs at the idea, mocking Gus and belittling him as someone who wouldn't be able to pull it off. Nacho then changes the subject to focus on his own motives, further implicating himself by explaining how much he truly hates the Salamancas. Not only does Nacho admit that he gladly opened Lalo's gates to let the hitman in because he hates Lalo so much, he calls Lalo a pig and says that he's glad what they did to him, which is kind of ironic considering that Hector knows that Lalo is still alive, along with the fact that Gus suspects it too. But Nacho then directly tells Hector that he's the reason why Hector's in a wheelchair, which is an amazing callback to the end of season 3. Not only do I love how Nacho gets to curse out Hector and tell him how he truly feels, but I also love how Hector eventually finds out why he's in the wheelchair to begin with.
I put you in that chair. So when you are sitting in your shitty nursing home and you're sucking down on your Jell-O night after night for the rest of your life, you think of me. You twisted fuck.
Bringing this up also helps to solidify the idea that Nacho wasn't working for Gus. Nacho explains his hatred towards Gus due to the fact that Nacho had to watch Gus resuscitate Hector right after Nacho tried killing him by swapping his pills.
Oh yeah, your heart meds. I switched them for sugar pills. You were dead and buried, and I had to watch this asshole bring you back.
This not only makes the idea of Nacho working for Gus less likely, but also makes the idea of Gus ordering Lalo's assassination less likely in general, considering the fact that Gus saved Hector's life. During all this, Nacho is actually using the shard of glass to cut his restraints in order to stab Bolsa in the leg and steal his own gun to take him as a hostage. With both the Salamanca twins, Tyrus, and Victor all holding Nacho at gunpoint from both angles, Nacho knew that he wasn't going to make it out alive. However, he does take this opportunity to put his fate into his own hands and instead takes himself out before anyone else can. Nacho and Victor have always hated each other, so Nacho didn't want Victor to take his life or rely on the fact that Victor would do so painlessly, especially after Victor seemed to get pleasure over the idea of beating up Nacho earlier in the episode to make this capture look believable. Now, right before Nacho pulls the trigger, he takes a moment to look at everyone there. First, he looks at the Salamancas, then he looks at Gus, and then finally he looks straight forward, which almost looks like he's staring at the camera, but he's actually looking in the distance at Mike, who is the last person that he stares at before taking his own life. The fact that Nacho does this is incredibly meaningful, as Mike always wanted to get Nacho out of the game and vouched for him multiple times leading up to this moment, but it was all for naught. Nacho looking at Mike could have also been an implication of Nacho trying to tell Mike to make sure that Mike protects his father after he's gone. Since Nacho was my favorite character, it was incredibly shocking to see him die here, even though the entire episode was leading up to it and almost slapping you in the face with the idea that, yeah, Nacho's gonna die. The reason why this is so shocking is that usually whenever a situation like this happens happens in a TV show, movie, video game, etc., the person in Nacho's position would somehow usually manage to come out of it alive at the last moment. Since the episode was continuously nailing home the idea that Nacho would die, the obvious subversion of expectation would be to somehow have Nacho get out of this situation alive. So with that in mind, the creators intentionally had Nacho die here almost as a double subversion of sorts, which is what makes the obvious outcome of Nacho's death still surprising and shocking. Due to this, as Nacho's lifeless body fell to the ground, I was in complete denial when I first saw this. Even while rewatching the episode knowing his fate, it's still an incredibly tense scene that builds and builds until the inevitable happens. Nacho's final monologue is incredibly powerful and is honestly some Emmy-worthy acting by Michael Mando. As Mike gives a heavy sigh from watching Nacho die, he starts packing up as the episode ends with Gus, Tyrus, and Victor leaving. As they do, we see the Salamanca twins carry Hector in his wheelchair over to Nacho's body so Hector can shoot rounds into Nacho's lifeless body. It's such a disrespectful and pathetic action done by Hector, who does so angrily since Nacho took away their ability for vengeance by killing himself before they could. Although Hector shooting Nacho's lifeless body is in very poor taste, it is kind of hilarious watching the twins pick up Hector by his wheelchair to carry him over. It's not the only time we see this happen in season 6, and both times just gives me a chuckle. It's wild how even during such a tragically depressing death scene, the show can still somehow get a chuckle out of me while I'm over here drowning in my own tears over my favorite character dying. And before we discuss the lawyer side of the episode, I first had a few more things I wanted to discuss about the outcome of Nacho's fate. First off, after this conclusion, the episode just time skips into the future as Mike and Gus anticipate Lalo's return. Although it makes sense to have a time skip and jump to the next beat in the story, I feel like it does a disservice to Nacho's fate. I would have liked to see Mike maybe pay respects to Nacho somehow before the time skip happened. I initially thought that going into the next episode, we'd see Mike maybe come back to Nacho's body alone and give him a burial with a time lapse or something similar to when Mike dug up that Good Samaritan's body in season 3. But nope, we don't see Mike bury Nacho, we don't see what happens to Nacho's body, and to be honest, we never even see Mike give a reaction from here on out. There is a moment in 609 where Mike does go and get closure with Nacho's father to close up that loose end, but as far as seeing Mike's initial reaction to Nacho's death, nothing. You'd think that we'd get a scene of Mike being frustrated with Gus over Nacho's death, in a similar manner to Mike being frustrated with Gus over Werner's death in the season 4 finale / season 5 premiere, but we don't. Which is honestly confusing, especially considering how many times Mike continuously vouched to Gus to try and save Nacho's life. I just definitely expected to see more of an aftermath after Nacho's death, but instead we just kind of sweep it under the rug and move to the next story beat, which is kind of disappointing. Also, as a side note, I find it odd how the Salamancas don't find it suspicious that Gus's men were the ones to eventually catch Nacho. I mean, the Salamanca twins were right on Nacho's tail, then suddenly he disappears and now Gus has caught him. It's not necessarily a plot hole, but rather something I would have liked to seen elaborated on. It would have been nice to see Gus give an excuse as to how they actually managed to capture Nacho, but sadly we never get one. Just another thing I would have liked to see from the aftermath of Nacho's death that we never get an answer to. But now on to the lawyer side of the show. For Jimmy and Kim, we don't see too terribly much of them this episode, as the episode did mainly focus on Nacho's ultimate fate. When it comes to Jimmy and Kim, 603 is essentially just them planning out their next moves and could be kinda seen as filler, at least for some of it. First, we see them planning their future cons by placing sticky notes on the back of one of Kim's paintings, effectively making it their secret con board. Remember how in 601 I mentioned that Saul keeping Kim's painting would become relevant for more reasons than one? Well, the first key point to that has now come to fruition, as the painting that they're using the back of for their con board is actually that very same painting that Saul ends up keeping, and more on that later. As part of one of their schemes, Jimmy and Kim plan to impersonate Howard to further ruin his reputation, but in order to do that, they need an exact replica of Howard's car. Since that proves to be too difficult, they instead come up with the idea of just straight up stealing Howard's car and using it during their scheme, and then returning it before Howard even realizes that it's gone. Now, I do like the chemistry between Jimmy and Kim in this scene as they figure out how to accomplish their goal. First, Kim is the one to actually suggest taking Howard's car, but Jimmy initially shoots it down as it'd have too many risks that could tip their hand. He calls it a bit direct, but Kim corrects him by calling it audacious. Jimmy thinks about it for a moment, and he doesn't want to disappoint Kim, Kim, so he quickly thinks of a way to pull off her suggestion. He suggests using Huel so that they aren't seen directly, but Kim acknowledges how Howard would recognize Huel from Jimmy's hearing against Chuck in 305. Jimmy, however, thinks of a way to pull it off where Huel won't be seen, throwing Kim's words back at her in a flirtatious way by calling it audacious, implying that he wants to make her idea work. Jimmy knows that conning with Kim is the main spark of their relationship, and so he goes along with her ideas in order to keep that spark going, shown by how they kiss at the end of the scene. So in order to accomplish this, they hire Huel and a keymaster to duplicate Howard's car keys so that they'll be able to steal his car. We get a funny scene of Huel pickpocketing the keys from a valet driver, followed by rushing the key to the keymaster to work on as fast as he can before the valet driver gets back to his post and realizes that the keys are missing. Huel and the keymaster finish their work just in time and leave while dropping the original keys in the parking lot for the valet driver to find when he walks back looking for them. So in a way, although we do see a mini scheme in this episode, it's all just a part of their setup to accomplish their actual scheme they'll be pulling off in the next episode. A scheme within a scheme, if you will. I do like the way that this Huel scheme was shot though, with the cinematography of the valet driver rushing back down the staircase to find the keys as Huel just continuously pressures the keymaster to hurry up. It's also interesting how the valet keys are numbered 614, 616, 617, and Howard's keys is 618, possibly referencing episodes of the show that never happened, as the final episode of the show is 613. So we then see Huel meet up with Jimmy to give him Howard's duplicated car keys, which hilariously have part of a TV remote to act as the key fob. Here we get probably the most genuine question ever asked by Huel that not only relates to Jimmy's current situation, but also to Jimmy throughout the show as a whole.
Why you do all this?
Huel points out that Jimmy and Kim are both lawyers that make good money and wonders why they even do all of this. It's a pretty good question, as they are financially stable enough that they don't really need to be doing cons and scams or schemes in order to make money, on top of the fact that Jimmy and Kim have never really shown much care for materialistic things up until this point. Just look at the fact that they both still live in Kim's initial apartment when they could easily afford something better, especially Kim after all of that Mesa Verde money. Now, Jimmy gives Huel the same phony excuse that Kim once gave him in the season 5 finale about how by forcing Sandpiper to settle, they're helping out all the elders get their money faster so they can actually spend it while they're still alive. This almost feels like Kim speaking through Jimmy to Huel here, to the point that it makes me wonder who Jimmy's even trying to convince, Huel or himself. Although Jimmy doesn't give the real answer to Huel's question, the real answer is that Jimmy and Kim don't necessarily do scams for the money, but they do what they do because they enjoy the excitement of it far more than they probably should, to the point that they even get off on it, as Howard will eventually call them out for it. Also, in case you were wondering, Huel was the returning side character cameo of the episode, and this is Huel's last episode of the show. Now, we do hear his name mentioned during one of the final episodes of the season, updating where he is post Breaking Bad, but this is the last time that we actually see him on screen for the rest of the show. Also, just to rewind a bit, after the scene where Jimmy and Kim figure out their plan to cut Howard's keys, but before we actually see it, while Kim and Jimmy are at the courthouse for the day, Kim approaches Suzanne Erickson about a case, and as Kim walks away, Suzanne takes her aside to speak to her about Lalo. Suzanne admits that she's figured out that the Jorge de Guzman name was an alias, and that she's found out who Lalo actually is. The DA office now knows that Lalo skipped bail and fled back to Mexico and died from a massive shootout at his compound. Suzanne has also connected the dots with Jimmy's affiliation with both Nacho and Tuco, first with Nacho in season 1 against the Kettleman disappearance, and then in season 2 with Mike in regard to Tuco's gun. Suzanne admits how 88 Khalil thinks that Jimmy knew who Lalo truly was, and that even so, Jimmy still helped him. This reveals that all of this is coming to light only because Jimmy messed up accidentally saying Lalo's real name to Khalil and Tim Roberts during 601. As I said then, that mistake would have consequences, and here we're seeing the beginning of that coming to fruition. We of course know that Jimmy did still help out Lalo while being aware that the Jorge de Guzman name was an alias, so Khalil is correct, but Suzanne wants to argue against Khalil, giving Jimmy the benefit of the doubt for not knowing. In this hypothetical, if Jimmy wasn't aware, she could help him, as this would have meant that the attorney-client privilege between Jimmy and de Guzman was in bad faith. Suzanne is giving Kim this ruse as if she wants to extend an olive branch out to Jimmy and give him a chance to speak on the truth to help the DA office against the cartel business currently going on in Albuquerque. Kim, however, knows that Suzanne is wrong and that Khalil is right in regard to Jimmy knowing about Lalo's true name, so Jimmy speaking to Suzanne wouldn't be a good idea. Plus, for all she knows, Suzanne could just be doing good cop, bad cop with Khalil, where Suzanne's trying to come across as the good cop while painting thinking Khalil is the bad cop when in reality both of them just want to bring the hammer down on Jimmy. Suzanne gives Jimmy the benefit of the doubt, stating that she doesn't think that he intended on becoming a cartel lawyer, but that he possibly got in over his head and couldn't get out. Although this is true, the way that she tells Kim how being a cartel lawyer doesn't suit Jimmy actually offends Kim, as she does see Jimmy as being capable of it since she knows that he dove in head first. Remember, even though Nacho did kidnap Saul to bring to Lalo, Jimmy did offer to do the bagman job on his own. Lalo would have let him off the hook, but Jimmy suggested doing it as long as he'd be paid $100,000 for it. Now, whenever someone seems to insult Jimmy in front of Kim, she takes it personally as well due to being so affiliated with Jimmy, along with the fact that she's now married to the guy. Take 507 for example, when Kevin told Kim that she could do a lot better than Jimmy, completely unaware that she actually just got married to Jimmy that same morning. Also, 603 isn't the first time that Suzanne has insulted Jimmy in front of Kim. Back in season 4, when Kim was trying to help with Huel's arrest, Kim spoke to Suzanne about it, and Suzanne directly insulted Jimmy to Kim's face, which was actually what drove Kim to come up with the Koshada Con. And so Kim actually brings this up in 603 as her response to Suzanne.
And our only witness is a scumbag, disbarred lawyer who peddles drop phones to criminals.
He practices now under the name Saul Goodman, although I distinctly remember you referring to him as a scumbag.
Kim also gets offended at the idea of Suzanne wanting Jimmy to betray his client, even calling it the term ratting. This is ironic because Suzanne admits that she's talking to Kim because she thinks that Kim would be more willing to hear what she has to say than Jimmy, when in reality it's the exact opposite. That night, as Jimmy returns with the duplicated car keys, Kim confronts Jimmy about what Suzanne told her. She tells him that Lalo is in fact dead and that the DA office knows about it, along with his true name. When Kim explains to Jimmy that Suzanne is giving him the option to talk, she admits that it's just a fishing expedition to see if Jimmy bites. Jimmy shows to be hesitant to answer, and Kim is disappointed that Jimmy seems to be indecisive and on the fence about it. It seems like Kim wants Jimmy to actually take some initiative here, but Jimmy just seems to be still focused on following Kim's moves and doing whatever she wants to keep her happy. Instead of telling Kim what he thinks, he asks her what she thinks he should do. So Kim passive-aggressively nudges Jimmy in the way that she wants him to handle it by asking him,
I guess it's basically, do you want to be a friend of the cartel, or do you want to be a rat?
It's a pretty slanted question that implies one option is good while the other is bad. Kim is definitely pushing Jimmy to keep his mouth shut, and the way that she says it really makes it seem like she wants him to continue being a cartel lawyer, or that she'd look down on him for ratting. This not only goes against what Suzanne said earlier about Kim, but also is the exact opposite of what Kim would have probably said in earlier seasons of the show compared to now. It's just so wild to see the transformation of Kim's character from where she started during the first few seasons all the way until now, and see her say this. Season 6 definitely shows a new side of Kim that both the audience and Jimmy never knew about. This episode gets a double S tier, easy. This is definitely one of my favorite episodes of the show. I originally gave this episode a single S tier as I wasn't even doing double S tier rankings back when this episode aired, but now that I am, I definitely think that 603 deserves to be bumped up from single S tier into double S tier. Now, I always hate seeing my favorite characters die in anything, as most people would, but if it gets written in a brilliant way that gives closure, makes complete sense, along with breaking my heart and making me feel deep emotions for it, then it gets the gold star of approval in my books. Whether a TV show or a movie makes me feel happy, sad, anxious, excited, etc., I do rate how well a TV show can immerse me based on how well it makes me feel a wide range of emotions. That being said, 603 definitely accomplished all of that and more. I mean, if you go back and watch my 603 reaction video after this episode first aired, I sound straight up depressed to the point that it's kind of embarrassing, but oh well. That's how I felt at the time, and it just goes to show how invested many of us became in these characters, which makes their fates just that much more impactful, especially when they're written in such a brilliant way. It's also incredibly interesting how they concluded Nacho's fate and put his death in 603. Now that the show is finished, when you consider everything that they had planned afterwards in regard to Howard, Lalo, along with Kim and Jimmy in 609, followed by Jimmy's full transformation into Saul, along with 4 full-on Gene episodes, it makes sense in retrospect why they'd conclude the Nacho story so so soon. However, when this episode first aired, it was incredibly shocking that they killed off Nacho just 3 episodes into the final season. Needless to say, it definitely set the bar high going into the rest of the final season, knowing that there were still another 10 full episodes after this. Also, as I mentioned earlier, although I have a few gripes on not seeing much of the aftermath of Nacho's fate, that's more of a gripe with episode 604 than anything. 603 concluded Nacho's fate perfectly, and I expected 604 to elaborate on it more, but it sadly does not. So in my opinion, I'm not going to give 603 flack for something that I think 604 should have done. However, one minor gripe that I do have with Nacho's death isn't necessarily anything to do with the death itself, or even anything in the episode, but the implication of what it means for Nacho versus Lalo. See, the season 5 finale ended with Lalo looking over at the glasses of alcohol that he was sharing with Nacho, which implied that Lalo knew that Nacho had betrayed him, followed by Lalo angrily stomping away as the episode ended. Due to this, it set up the idea that in season 6 we would have some sort of Lalo versus Nacho standoff where Lalo would confront Nacho on betraying him. Not only does that never happen, Lalo and Nacho never have a single scene again at all during season 6 before they both eventually die. It makes sense why the show would make us think that Lalo would go after Nacho in 602 like Mike thought, as it subverts our expectations, so when we don't see Lalo for multiple episodes, it makes us wonder where he is just as much as Gus, until we are finally shown that he went all the way to Germany to collect info on his lead about Werner from season 5. However, by doing this, they essentially split up the Lalo and Nacho stories into 2 completely separate branches. We thought that Lalo and Nacho would clash again, but in reality, they went down 2 completely separate paths. Instead of Lalo focusing on how Nacho betrayed him, he instead just jumped right into focusing on getting revenge on Gus. Likewise, Nacho's path sent him down a different route that concluded in 603 with Nacho giving himself up to save his father, which obviously happened before Lalo ever returned. Now, I love both of these stories on their own, but it's just such a shame that Lalo and Nacho never crossed paths again after Lalo realized that Nacho had betrayed him. It's like Lalo just went straight after chasing Gus, completely ignoring the fact that Nacho betrayed him and was the middleman for Gus. I do love what the creators did with Lalo and Nacho's separate stories for season 6, but it just seems like a missed opportunity to not have Lalo somehow acknowledge or confront Nacho for betraying him. I do really like how this episode kind of starts where it ends, where the episode ends by zooming in on the broken shard of glass, still with blood from when Nacho stabbed Bolsa, and then if you instantly rewatch the episode, then it goes back to that cold open and shows the flower and shows the zip ties and it shows that shard of glass, and it just hits so much harder on the second rewatch. I love it. Or after you finish watching the episode, you can just think back to the cold open and be like, oh, that's what that meant, and it just makes it hit home a lot harder, at least in my opinion. I really enjoy it. And then finally, I really enjoy the lawyer side of the show as well. Even though we don't see much of Jimmy and Kim this episode as they are mostly just planning, I did enjoy their scenes during this rewatch more than I did when the episode first aired. 603 was mainly focusing on Nacho's fate, with Jimmy and Kim kind of being a B story, and the creators knew that, so due to this, they purposely gave Jimmy and Kim less screen time in order to focus on Nacho and the cartel stuff. That being said, now that some time has passed, in retrospect, I'm able to appreciate and pay attention to the Jimmy and Kim stuff more now that the shock of Nacho's fate has somewhat faded. I enjoyed Jimmy and Kim's chemistry while deciding to steal Howard's actual car. The Huel stuff was great, especially his conversation with Jimmy, and then all the Suzanne stuff with Kim was also incredibly interesting to see, especially considering the way that Kim reacts to it, along with what she said to Jimmy about either being a friend of the cartel or a rat. Season 6, Episode 4, Hit and Run. This episode starts out with one of those mysterious cold opens I talked about, this time focusing on a couple biking through their neighborhood while making us wonder why we're watching them do so. I do, however, really like the song for this cold open, it's just so catchy. They end up biking back to their house, which is when things start getting weird, as their home is revealed to be mysteriously monitored by security cameras. Then, as the couple casually puts their bikes away in their garage and they go into their kitchen, there are randomly hired men with guns already chilling in there. I just love the what the heck feeling that this gives us, as the elephant in the room is clearly being ignored. As the woman goes into the living room, the camera pans to a man watching all the security cameras around the neighborhood, and more specifically, Gus Fring's house. For avid Breaking Bad fans, we probably all recognized Gus's house immediately, but to be honest, if you aren't as obsessed with these shows as some of us are, I totally don't blame you at all for not realizing the implications of this until later on in the episode. Oh, also some fun facts about this cold open is first, the actors who play the couple depicted in it are actually a couple in real life, along with the newly painted fire truck red house that they complained about being completely CGI. So add that red house alongside the bottle stopper from 601 to the list of things you never needed to know that were actually CG. Later in the episode, we watch Gus arrive home at his house, and he lets a visible sigh out once he gets inside and closes the front door due to being able to drop his public persona and relax, so to speak. As Gus methodically changes out of his work clothes, there's a handful of interesting things to notice. Since Gus is on the constant lookout for Lalo to attack at any moment, he has a very closed off and private demeanor. We also see that Gus is wearing a discreet bulletproof vest under his work clothes, along with a hidden ankle gun. As Gus goes into his basement, we get the huge reveal of a secret tunnel that leads from his house to his neighbors, who are the couple from the cold open. I'm unsure if Gus convinced them to do this or if he purchased the next door house himself and then purposely moved in this couple as cover, but either way, it's pretty brilliant. Gus is effectively using his neighbor's house as a secret safe house, while he has a body double of his own living in his actual house as a red herring. This answers the many questions that the cold open gave us, as Gus and Mike have their men keeping watch of Gus's house along with the neighborhood in general. Since the secret underground tunnel would have taken a long time to make, I assume that Gus had this neighboring safe house prepared long before Lalo was ever introduced, that we're just now seeing it come into effect as Gus has an actual use for it while waiting for Lalo to potentially return. This complex camera system also answers a plot hole from Breaking Bad, as this explains how Gus/Tyrus knew that Walt was approaching Gus's house during the episode 38 snub. As Gus and Mike discuss security, Mike seems to be losing faith in the idea that Lalo's still alive, or that he might return, as it's been almost 2 weeks since the assassination attempt. Mike also complains that his men are stretched thin and overworked, but Gus is sure that Lalo is still alive. Mike then states a question that feels like the projection of what many viewers wondered during the time span between the end of episode 601 all the way to the end of 605.
Salamanca is alive.
And where is he?
And I really like how we get a small comedic moment between Gus and Mike here, especially considering how serious they usually are.
The man you placed in my kitchen, you told me that he had experience as a short order cook.
2 years at McDonald's in college. He's not there just to make French fries. I need guys in close.
He's not up to Pollo standards.
I'll find a replacement.
Catching up with the lawyer side of the episode, we see Howard taking an afternoon cruise in his Jaguar to his therapist, and as the appointment begins, we get some small talk before learning that not only is Howard married, but that he's experiencing marital problems. This is the first time that we're hearing about either of these details, and it's incredibly important foreshadowing for the next handful of episodes. Howard also mentions a dream that he had about his father, which may vaguely give some backstory, but that's a topic for another time. While Howard is at his therapist meeting, we cut to Jimmy dressed up as close to Howard as he could get, even with a hilariously terrible spray tan, as he confidently walks down an alley to take Howard's car. Jimmy brought a cone with him so that when he takes the vehicle, he can leave the cone in the parking spot that Howard's car was in, so no one takes it while he's gone. As Jimmy steps out of the car to place the cone, there's a great cinematic shot that I love of the camera actually stuck to the car door while Jimmy opens and closes it. Jimmy then goes to the Crossroad Motel to pick up a Breaking Bad character at a Breaking Bad location, go figure. So Jimmy has hired Wendy the hooker to play a part in his scheme where he wants to drive past Cliff and push a hooker out of Howard's car while looking like Howard from a distance. This not only builds on what Jimmy did in season 5 in regard to sending hookers to Howard and Cliff's lunch, but also has a deeper implication of adultery since we just learned moments ago that Howard is actually in a struggling marriage. Also, some fun Wendy moments include her taking forever to get in the car due to her wanting a root beer, which may be a reference to her using the same vending machine during an early episode of Breaking Bad season 1, along with her later in season 2 telling Hank that she wanted a root beer while in custody. Another funny moment with Wendy is that when she's in the car with Jimmy, she's just fascinated over his Howard hair. Meanwhile, Kim is out for lunch waiting for Cliff to arrive, and while she waits, she's extremely fidgety, shown by not only her classic foot tapping, but also due to her methodically adjusting her spot at the table, where to hide her phone, along with how to place the menu. venues. So the plan is for Kim to be out for lunch with Cliff and make small talk long enough in order to assure that they see Jimmy throw Wendy out of the car. But while Kim is making small talk with Cliff, she actually strikes gold, and not in regard to any schemes. She pitches to Cliff her dream job of opening a pro bono practice, and Cliff actually bites. More on this in a bit, but it's extremely important to Kim's character. Anyways, Jimmy comes speeding around the corner, dumps Wendy out of the car just as planned, and speeds off with Wendy doing an A+ acting job. Cliff is just completely baffled, and the plan worked mostly. So as Jimmy drives Howard's car back to where he got it, he starts jamming out to the radio in the same way that Howard did earlier, which is an uncanny valley parallel if I've ever seen one. Jimmy originally distastefully turned off the music while taking the car because he was all focused and nervous about the scheme, but now that he's feeling accomplished afterwards, he of course blasts it without a care. That is, however, until he gets back to the parking lot and realizes that someone moved his cone and stole the parking spot.
They moved the cone? Kinda asshole moves a cone? Oh, crap.
He nearly melts down and has a freaking panic attack over this, but is able to do some quick thinking and move one of the parking signs over a space to a no parking zone, hoping that Howard won't realize that his car has been magically moved over by one spot. Jimmy manages to get the car back and fix his parking spot problem just in time for Howard to turn the corner, and the parking sign that he moved stays standing for just long enough until after Howard drives away. It's pretty hilarious seeing Jimmy melt down over his cone being moved, struggling to move the sign, along with the sign falling over shortly after Howard drives away. Great comedic timing. Due to this close call, it was apparently very difficult for the creators to scout for a proper location that matches everything they needed in regard to the window looking down in the parking lot, the second story outside walkway, even the stairs leading down to the parking lot around the corner. Meanwhile, Kim ends up driving Wendy back to the Crossroad Motel, but as she does so, Wendy spots a suspicious vehicle driving around and suspects them to be undercover cops, complaining that it'll kill her business for the rest of the day. As Kim drives away, she notices that the supposed undercover cops are now following her. They eventually stop, and Kim returns to the apartment where Jimmy recaps his difficulties returning Howard's car. Kim not only praises them on how well their scheme worked, but also admits to Jimmy that Cliff totally bought her pitch, even though it was only intentionally meant to buy Jimmy enough time to grab Wendy. Also, Kim brings up the fact that she thinks that she's being followed, but Jimmy denies this by saying,
Well, you know what they say. The wicked flee when no man pursueth.
And I love the way that Kim says,
You think we're wicked?
as a response. Jimmy elaborates that she only feels like someone's after her because actually getting away with their scams seems too good to be true, but we'll see about that. The next day, Jimmy goes to the courthouse and he realizes that everyone's giving him either a hard time or a cold shoulder. The guy at the metal detector pretends not to know him, the receptionist doesn't accept his usual bribes, no one sits with him at the lunch tables, and even Hannah Banana ignores him, so he finally confronts Bill Oakley as to why. Oakley explains how everyone knows that Jimmy willingly helped Lalo and that he scammed the court and the judge to get a murdering cartel member back out on the street. Jimmy tells Oakley to prove it, which we get the iconic response out of Oakley.
There's proving, and then there's knowing.
Now, I would say that this is Oakley's victory lap as a returning character too, but oh boy, do we ever get a lot of Oakley near the end of the season, and I'm excited to talk about it when we get there. Honestly, it's kind of depressing seeing how everyone that Jimmy's grown friendly work relationships with just leaves them in the dust. Since Jimmy took Kim's advice to be a friend of the cartel instead of a rat, it's effectively turned the entire courthouse dynamic against him. He's now an outcast in the eyes of all the legal coworkers that he once thought of as his peers. Yet another straw to break the camel's back that'll eventually push Jimmy into his final full-on Saul Goodman transformation later on in the season. And then fun fact, the TY beanie that Jimmy tried bribing the receptionist with is the same one that we saw in the no value box during the 601 cold open at Saul's mansion. I guess he was never able to bribe someone with TYs ever again. Tragic. So although Jimmy has ruined his work-life reputation by affiliating himself with Lalo, he soon comes to realize that it's not all negative, as he starts to get an influx of appointment calls while at the courthouse, and then when he returns to the nail salon, he walks in to see that it's completely full of new clients waiting for him. Since Saul now has the reputation of a cartel lawyer, it seems that now every criminal with legal problems within the area specifically wants his help. This includes another Breaking Bad cameo, Spooge. In case you don't remember, he's the ATM guy from Breaking Bad, except his looks have a night and day difference here, as this appears to be before he became a scabby drug addict. Meanwhile, while Kim is meeting another one of her clients at the El Camino diner, she notices the same car outside watching her as before at the Crossroad Motel. She then does the ballsy move of actually going outside to confront the men in this car, writing down their license plate and then threatening to call them in. The driver apologizes for disturbing her and drives away. This reminds me a lot of Walt calling the cops on Tyrus for looking outside Hank's house in Breaking Bad. Anyways, Kim goes back to the El Camino diner to meet with more clients, since she's using it almost as a temporary office for her pro bono practices. As she's paying the waitress at the end of her day, Mike turns around to randomly tell her that the two men who were following her are now gone. That's right, this is the first official scene with Mike and Kim together, and it's just straight up awesome. Kim originally thought that the police were following her or something, but it turns out to be Mike's men. And I love how Mike is actually blurry in a frame from a previous shot while Kim's saying goodbye to a client before the camera finally pans over to him starting to speak to her. It reminds me a lot of the Gus reveal back in 302 when Mike sent Jimmy into Los Pollos. Now Kim asks if she even knows him, but Mike just politely asks her to sit for a moment and he'll answer any questions that he can. Mike explains that he's not with the police, and although he has his men watching her and Jimmy, Mike doesn't care about any weird schemes that they seem to be doing against Howard. Mike says that he's trying to solve a problem of his own, and when Kim asks him to elaborate, Mike just says Lalo's name, implying that he's still alive. Mike assures Kim that there's only 1,000 to 1 chance that Lalo would ever reach out to her or Jimmy, but that he has men watching any person or place that Lalo even has a small chance of popping out at. Mike implies that he's not allowed to tell her who he's working for, and then just tells her to ignore his guys from now on. Hopefully she won't see them anymore anyways, and that hopefully sooner or later they'll be gone. Kim wonders why Mike is telling her all of this and not Jimmy, since he is Jimmy's connection, to which Mike tells her that she's made of sterner stuff, which seems to be completely true going into season 6, and from Mike's point of view is probably due to the way that Kim saved Jimmy's ass from Lalo in 509 last season. Kim realizes that Mike is the guy who saved Jimmy's life out in the desert, but also realizes that Mike was also the man who worked the toll booth at the courthouse, which is a crazy connection to make, as it's wild to think that such a highly trained killer could just blend into plain sight like that.
I do know you. You worked in the parking booth at the courthouse. You're the attendant.
I was.
I also love how Kim opens her hand while she's sitting down as if she's giving a what the heck gesture after Mike admits that he was the toll booth attendant before leaving. But yeah, this Mike and Kim scene is complete hype, and you can just tell how much it all catches Kim off guard, considering how shaken up she is once Mike leaves. This also confirms that it was obviously Mike's men following her and Jimmy ever since they left the Kettlemans at the end of 602.
We've got guys watching anywhere he might turn up this side of Mexico.
This episode ends with Kim meeting Jimmy in the parking lot of what will become his eventual Breaking Bad office, as the nail salon owner wants Jimmy out due to him bringing so many criminal clients into her salon. Even though Jimmy has kind of left the nail salon multiple times over the show, it's crazy that he still goes back to it all the way up until this point in the final season. So in a way, I guess you could consider this as the nail salon lady's victory lap return as a side character as well. Also, Jimmy explaining how he plans on his Breaking Bad office space being temporary to Kim reminds me a lot of the Breaking Bad flashback when Walt and Skyler first looked at their home before buying it, also thinking that that would be temporary, which as we know also became permanent. Now in this moment, it was highly expected of Kim to drop the news to Jimmy that Lalo is still alive, but she decides not to, as to maybe not ruin his mood, and instead just gives her honest opinion of the office space, acting as if nothing's wrong. This includes a reference to Taco Cabeza and how it's just around the corner, which as you may know is a food place name dropped by Jesse during the Breaking Bad season 1 finale that we never actually see.
So where do you transact your business? Enlighten me.
I don't know, how about Taco Cabeza? Half the deals I've ever done went down at Taco Cabeza. Nobody ever gets shot at Taco Cabeza.
Parking is good, bail bond row isn't far, and Taco Cabeza is just around the corner.
This episode gets an A tier. When this episode first aired, I gave it a B, and it was honestly one of, if not my least favorite episode of the season. But now in retrospect, I can enjoy it a lot more for what it is, as I've dropped most of the gripes that I had with it previously. After the craziness that was 603, it makes sense that 604 would be kind of a soft reset of sorts in order to get all of our ducks in a row and set up for the rest of the upcoming story in regard to showing where all the pieces stand on the board. Although I totally get that and completely understood why they did the 2-week time skip when the episode first aired, I just still couldn't help but feel a tad disappointed that there wasn't more of an aftermath following Nacho's death. That being said, I do enjoy the episode a lot more this time around, and I now think that it brings a lot more to the table than I initially thought. I think just having to wait week after week definitely impacted my original impression of the episode, especially having such a tame reset after the Nacho arc, but being able to just binge through the episodes as I'm rewatching them in retrospect definitely gives a different impact and impression. This was very much a setup episode, but even so, it had a lot of great moments within it that do deserve the praise. 604 has a lot of returning side characters, mainly being Breaking Bad character and location cameos thrown in as good measure. We got the reprisal of Wendy and Spooge, along with the Crossroad Motel and the introduction of Saul's Breaking Bad office location. Then we also got Oakley and the rest of the courthouse crew as well. The Howard stuff was really interesting too, not just the scheme itself, but also learning about Howard's marriage along with the side story between Cliff and Kim. There's also a lot of comedic moments in this episode, from everything going on with Wendy to Jimmy freaking out about the parking spot and wrestling the parking sign, or even moments between Gus and Mike, and Kim and Mike. Speaking of which, wow, yeah, that Mike and Kim scene was awesome. Due to Better Call Saul having two distinctive sides of it, being the cartel side and the lawyer side, at times it can feel like two different shows are running alongside each other, especially during the earlier seasons. Due to this, whenever we see these two separate sides of the show actually cross over, it's usually incredibly exciting, and this is why a lot of fans usually like the rare scenes where Mike and Jimmy actually come together. Also, since there are two distinct sides to the show, there's many characters that we followed for multiple seasons who have never actually met each other, so when they finally do, it's a huge deal, and for example, obviously being Kim and Mike. Oh, also, I'd be remiss to not mention the fact that Ray Seahorn actually directed episode 604, which is pretty cool. She discussed her experience directing the episode more on the Insider podcast, along with various other interviews if you'd like to learn more about it, but I'll say that she definitely did a pretty good job. Season 6 Episode 5, Black and Blue. This episode starts out with yet another one of those mysterious cold opens that'll make more sense by the end of the episode. We see a worker encasing a slide rule in lucite that has the engraving. Yeah, I'm not even going to pronounce it, but it's German for "With Love, Your Boys." Just like with the last episode's cold open, I really do enjoy the song choice for this 605 cold open as well. It's just such a soothing German song. The German music and engraving is definitely a great foreshadowing hint at the fact that we'll be seeing some sort of continuation with the Werner story from all the way back in season 4. These mysterious cold opens do share the risk of becoming a tad bit self-indulgent with themselves, especially since they not only do this so many times in this show, but also so many times in a row during this season. I do remember liking this cold open when it first came out, but I still couldn't help but wish that it had more significance to it than just watching a slide rule being encased in lucite. That being said, in retrospect, I enjoy it a lot more now. I think I just originally thought that due to the fact that since there were only so many episodes left, I was hoping that they'd get the most out of their remaining screen time and not waste any time now just to feel rushed at the end. Honestly, that may also be why I wasn't the biggest fan of 604 when it first aired either. I don't know if Game of Thrones might have slightly traumatized me a tad in regard to when it comes to a show feeling rushed while concluding their final season, but in retrospect, I feel happy and safe to say that the final season of Better Call Saul is well paced, and giving themselves 3 extra episodes for season 6 was more than enough time to conclude the story, even considering they did 4 whole Gene episodes, especially since they actually ended the prequel 2004 story by episode 9. Again, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, we'll get to that when we get to it. Now, after the title sequence, we open with Kim waking up in bed before Jimmy, to which she goes and jams her front door shut with a chair and then has a cigarette. This is because she's now paranoid of Lalo returning, and when Jimmy wakes up to see this, he just thinks that she's now developed PTSD similar to him due to the events that he went through in the back half of season 5. This episode continues the trend of Kim keeping the fact that Lalo is alive a secret from Jimmy, with us even getting a cool Easter egg at the beginning of the scene to imply so. The scene first starts with a shot of their alarm clock that says it's 3:17, but it's sideways so that if you read it upside down, it spells out the word lie, which may be a reference to how Kim is lying to Jimmy about thinking that Lalo is still dead. To nail that point home even more, once Jimmy is woken up and thinks that Kim is experiencing similar PTSD to him, he sits down beside her and sighs with relief while stating, "Thank God Lalo's dead," with Kim just silently agreeing. It seems like Kim doesn't want to tell him for multiple reasons, with some being more selfish than others. First off, she doesn't want to tell him because he seems like he's just now finally starting to get back to feeling like himself again after all the traumatic experiences that he went through which involved Lalo, and that's only because he now thinks that Lalo's dead. But also, she's selfishly not telling him because she doesn't want it to psych him out, as she wants him to be in the right headspace to continue their schemes against Howard and Cliff to force Sandpiper to settle. and she knows that if he finds out that Lalo's still alive, he's gonna want to cancel their cons and just run away and hide like he did by taking them to that fancy hotel during the season 5 finale. Next up, as Aaron, Cliff, and Howard meet with their Sandpiper clients, Howard saves the day from Aaron starting to fumble. However, instead of being impressed, Cliff is more focused on how energized Howard seems to be, as Cliff is misinterpreting his natural high energy as being potentially drug related. Cliff asks to speak to Howard privately afterwards and comes clean about his suspicions of Howard having a drug and adultery problem. Here we also learn that Cliff has struggled with his son having a recurring drug problem issue, which causes Cliff to have a preconceived notion going into this conversation. So Howard is understandably confused and baffled at these accusations as he is genuinely innocent, but Cliff just expects Howard to deny everything due to past experiences Cliff has had with his own son, which is where the line,
"I'm not asking you to respond, I just need you to know that I know,"
comes from. I love how the scene just jumps straight into halfway through the conversation by first hearing Howard's reaction to what we already know Cliff must be accusing him of, followed by Howard reiterating what Cliff just told him as exposition. It's just such a better way to assemble this scene than just starting out with Cliff saying his accusations in the first place. This of course is also exactly what Jimmy and Kim wanted to happen, for Cliff to be given so many seemingly separate examples of Howard having a problem where alone they don't hold much ground, but the more they build and build on top of each other creates an elephant in the room that Cliff can't ignore any longer. After Cliff admits that he met with Kim when he saw the Wendy incident, Howard realizes that Jimmy is behind all of this, thinking that Jimmy has set Kim up as an accomplice. Although Howard is correct in assuming that Jimmy and Kim are behind this, he's wrong in assuming that Jimmy is the mastermind when it's actually Kim this time. It makes sense that Howard would think it's Jimmy due to the way that Jimmy continuously messed with him in season 5, but Howard doesn't realize that his conversation with Kim during the season 5 finale actually pushed her over the edge and got her to take Jimmy's side, wanting to mess with Howard even more than Jimmy did. Also, let me just say that although Cliff went into this with a preconceived notion, he's still a hell of a good friend to Howard. Coming to him in private like this and confiding in him with these accusations in such a way where you can tell that he is genuinely just a friend trying to reach out, and that he also wants the best for Howard. Poor Cliff getting played by Jimmy and Kim like this, being innocently clueless the whole time, especially when Howard figures out what's happening and leaves Cliff in the dust.
Jimmy McGill.
You'll have to excuse me.
Howard.
Julie.
I just love how confused Cliff is when Howard tells Cliff that he has a Jimmy McGill problem, and it's just so hilarious and gets a chuckle out of me every time I watch it. So this begins Howard starting to retaliate back at Jimmy and Kim, which is actually exactly what they wanted, but more on that in a little bit. What I will say is the fact that I love how when Howard backs out of his parking spot at Sandpiper to leave, we get a close-up shot of his Namaste license plate, which actually implies the exact opposite, as Howard is no longer taking the high road here and is going to fight back. So Francesca arrives at Saul's new office space to a full lineup of customers already waiting outside. Jimmy lets her inside and gives her a hilariously pathetic tour of the space, as there's nothing in the office except for a basic table and chair for Francesca to sit in, along with the toilet that's still randomly there from the last episode, which Kim joked to Jimmy about how he could never get rid of it. Apparently the toilet is an inside joke from Vince Gilligan that he explained on the Insider podcast, which references an experience that he once had getting a tour of a rental space while there was randomly a disconnected and used but unflushed toilet in the property that the landlord just didn't even acknowledge. Anyways, Jimmy pretty much needs Francesca to just instantly start working for him again, as he already has a full lineup of customers outside waiting for him, and he told them that they'd only have to wait 4.5 minutes from when he let Francesca in. Jimmy wanting to immediately hire Francesca last minute in order to instantly start taking clients for him has got to be a callback to the way that he instantly hired her in season 3 against Kim's wishes for the very same reason, because he needed her to start taking calls for him right away. When Francesca asks where Kim is, Jimmy corrects her by saying, "You mean my wife?" which also reminds me a lot of when Jimmy corrected Mike in 508 when they were out in the desert together.
You told your girlfriend what you're doing.
My wife.
Wife.
Yeah, wife.
Congratulations.
Where's Miss Wexler?
You mean my wife? That's right. Made an honest woman out of her.
Anyways, Jimmy explains how he'll be taking on a solo venture right now, and that he'll be paying her a lot if she stays to help him, which stays true to Francesca's character, as here on out the only reason why she subjects herself to being surrounded by the likes of people like Saul and eventually even Walt is the huge paycheck that she gets by doing so. Well, technically she also agrees to work for Jimmy due to declaring that she wants a say in the decorating, but oh boy, we'll see how well that turns out. She does get to decide the office design, but it turns out to not be as all chalked up as she thinks it is. Jimmy also updates her on his swap of clients from elders to, well, junkies, and explains how he now practices under the name Saul Goodman. I love the return of Francesca, and I gotta say it's about damn time. I'm also happy to say that she's here to stay for the rest of the season. Meanwhile, Kim catches up with her old assistant Viola. Initially seems like she may be thinking of rehiring her, but she's actually fishing for information about who is mediating the Sandpiper case since Rich actually transferred Viola onto the case. Kim gets the information that she wants, but also during this conversation as Kim and Viola catch up, Viola admits how much she admires Kim for the passion that she has helping pro bono clients. It initially seems wholesome, but I wonder if Kim actually feels bad now for using Viola for information when Viola looks up to her so much. That night, Jimmy meets with who he thinks is a new client by the name of H.O. Ward, somehow not realizing that actually spells out Howard in full. Howard openly confronts Jimmy on the fact that Jimmy still has a problem with him and offers Jimmy an opportunity for them to fight in the ring to hash out their differences. Howard wants to fight Jimmy because if Jimmy accepts, it's essentially an unspoken admission of guilt that he still in fact has been messing with Howard. Jimmy could very easily plead ignorance here as he technically hasn't seen Howard in person ever since Jimmy yelled at him at the end of episode 507. Jimmy initially does pretend that he doesn't know what Howard's talking about, but Howard can tell that Jimmy purposely wanted to get caught, calling it Psych 101. Jimmy does actually accept though, meaning that he is admitting of being behind everything that's happened to Howard this season, and we'll get more into why Jimmy's okay with this in just a moment. For now, I'd like to shine a spotlight on how hilariously amazing this Howard versus Jimmy boxing fight is.
Yeah! I'm the champ! Hey, look at me!
Jimmy does a lot of hilarious showboating, even though he's clearly the amateur in this situation. Fun fact, one of the actors of the Salamanca twins actually coached Patrick Fabian and Bob Odenkirk how to not only box, but how to act their boxing in such a way where they're making amateur moves and foot placements. I love the way that Jimmy keeps coming back even after Howard keeps getting in hit after hit, even to the point that Jimmy tries blatantly tackling Howard, but to no avail. Howard ends up victorious and tells Jimmy that although he hopes this will end the feud between them, that it probably won't. Turns out that Howard wanting to box Jimmy wasn't just a fishing expedition for himself, but also because Howard wanted to hire a PI to follow Jimmy around. Jimmy accepting Howard's boxing match was all the admission of guilt that Howard needed, so afterwards he instantly hires the PI to follow Jimmy, unaware that this is literally exactly what Jimmy and Kim wanted, and that the PI is secretly working for them. Poor Howie, he tries the best, but even so, Jimmy and Kim are constantly 5 steps ahead of him. From wanting Cliff to confront Howard, to wanting Howard to realize that they're behind everything, to confronting Jimmy about it, and even hiring a PI against them, along with everything that happens in the future few episodes. Every time that Howard tries to make a move back, he turns out to be walking right into their trap. It also makes sense how they'd think that Howard would hire a PI against Jimmy to try and get proof as to what he's up to, especially since Chuck has been known to hire a PI in the past as well, since HHM has a detective agency that they hire PIs from. As we know from episode 607, at this point in time, Jimmy and Kim had called Howard's assistant at HHM under the ruse of being HHM's detective agency wanting their number updated, so when Howard hired a PI from the new number, he was actually hiring a con man hired by Jimmy and Kim to pretend to be Howard's PI. I'm mentioning this now because it's just such a great twist, and knowing this from the beginning during a rewatch gives so much replay value in regard to watching episodes 605 and 607, and I just really love it. As Jimmy gets back home, Kim's waiting for him on the balcony having a smoke and a beer, which reminds me a lot of the balcony scenes in 503. Needless to say, she's surprised to see him get out of his car with an ice pack on his face. As Jimmy tries to put makeup on his black eye, it also reminds me a lot of Jesse and Walt once doing the same thing during Breaking Bad. Now we've officially seen all 3 main characters between both shows try to hide black eyes with makeup, kind of a funny but pointless connection to make that isn't really a callback or anything, but I still enjoy it. I also love the way that Kim tries spinning it into a positive, making light of the situation.
I'm Saul Goodman. Pow! I fight for you.
Kim then informs Jimmy that she got the info that she needed out of Viola about who the Sandpiper Mediator is, and shows Jimmy a picture of him, a retired judge named Rand Casimiro with a huge distinctive mustache. Once they go to bed, Jimmy wonders why he gave in to Howard's ploy, with Kim's response implying how it doesn't matter if Jimmy admits to Howard that he's behind everything, as their endgame is to make Howard look crazy and make a fool of himself at the mediation meeting in such a way where he knows that Jimmy's behind it, but he can't prove anything, and it would make him sound crazy trying.
Why'd I do that?
You know what's coming next.
By this point of the show, we obviously don't know what's coming next like they do though, which made it incredibly intriguing as we speculated on why Jimmy was okay with his admission of guilt towards Howard. Meanwhile, we see Gus working at Los Pollos and his anxiety-driven OCD is back and in full force. This is noticeable from the way that he places his pen down on his desk to the way that he zones out while a customer is speaking to him, only to be snapped out of it by an employee dropping some trays, which Lyle quickly jumps into action to correct. Great to see he's still around. But then the way that Gus marches outside to the parking lot is in such a way where he seems to be desperately looking for any signs of Lalo, and it clearly shows how playing the waiting game is driving Gus crazy. Usually he likes to be multiple steps ahead of his opponents and constantly planning, but in this situation he pretty much just needs to sit back and wait until Lalo makes the first move, but he doesn't know when that'll happen. That night, Mike gets smuggled into Gus's safe house by hiding in the back of his neighbor's SUV, which is just such a Mike thing to do. Mike then finds Gus anxiously scrubbing the bathtub with a toothbrush, and Mike isn't impressed. Mike tells Gus that the whole point of everything that they're doing is so Gus can try to get some rest, but Gus is so restless from having to wait for Lalo to attack that he's doing anything he can to keep his mind occupied. Gus scrubbing the bathtub with a toothbrush is a very ineffective way to do so, making it seem like Gus is almost torching himself. We saw something similar to this in the last season with Gus forcing Lalo to clean the fryers over and over again, except this time instead of projecting it onto someone else, he's now doing all the scrubbing himself. Gus is so sick and tired of just sitting around waiting for Lalo to make the first move, so Gus thinks of something else that he can do to try to prepare for anything. Gus has Mike bring him to the Super Lab location so that he can plant a gun there on the off chance that he'll somehow get trapped down there with Lalo and need it. Kinda crazy how this turns out to be exactly what happens, but I do imagine that Gus has like 100 other failsafe contingency plans set up just like this. Now if we're meant to think that this is true, it would have honestly been nice for the show to, show us some others as red herrings to make the eventual Lalo-Gus standoff less predictable. And I know that showing us red herrings would run the risk of wasting screen time, something that I just mentioned I was picky about earlier, but to be honest, I would have preferred this instance. If we saw other contingency plans that Gus had set up for different situations as well, it would have kept us guessing as to which one he would end up relying on when Lalo finally striked, instead of just showing us the one of him placing the gun down in the super lab and that's it. Because we obviously knew that that was sort of a Chekhov's gun of sorts and it would have to come into play somehow. The Lalo-Gus final confrontation being a tad too predictable is one of the rare gripes that I actually have with this season, but again, we'll discuss that more when we get to it. The rest of the episode is dedicated to showing Lalo in Germany wooing Werner's widowed wife at a bar under the ruse that he's just being a normal guy. The reveal of Lalo being in Germany was crazy, and actually seeing Werner's wife on screen is something that I never thought would happen. Credit where it's due, this was a great subversion of expectations and definitely surprised me, even though some people did predict that Lalo would go to Germany. Bringing Werner's wife Marguerite into the show is also a great callback to season 4, giving more of a purpose to the season 4 Werner arc instead of just leaving it in the past, as the conclusion of that arc is even where Lalo was brought into the story, making this all feel like it's coming full circle. Lalo brings up the town that had the resort that Werner wanted to meet his wife in as an icebreaker to start talking to Marguerite, which naturally leads their conversation in the direction of Werner's death, which allows Lalo to get a lot of useful intel out of her. This includes learning that she had lawyers come and take most of Werner's paperwork, along with the fact that she doesn't know much about his work in general because it was so secretive, and even the fact that Marguerite never met Werner's boys, not even at Werner's funeral. This gives Lalo the hint to try and find something left over at her house that the lawyers didn't take that will lead him to one of Werner's boys, since they probably know the truth of what Gus had them working on, along with how Werner actually died, since they seemingly aren't allowed to have any contact with Marguerite. It's also interesting how when Marguerite brings up lawyers, Lalo shakes his head in disapproval of them.
The lawyers came to my house. I asked questions, they wouldn't say much.
Lawyers.
He could just be playing along with the conversation, but at the same time, it's almost like he's negatively thinking of his own experiences with Jimmy and Kim in this moment, which is, not only a callback to episode 509, but maybe foreshadowing for 607 and 608. It's crazy how well Lalo flirts with Marguerite to the point that she does seriously consider inviting Lalo into her home, and it really does make me think for a moment that it could happen, but instead, Lalo just, casually waits around until the morning to sneak into her house after she leaves for work. As Lalo enters her house, we see Marguerite's dog, Little Bear, which is actually a callback to in season 4 when Werner was talking to Marguerite over the phone about getting a new dog. Sadly, Little Bear turns out to be bad luck for Lalo, since when Marguerite briefly returns home due to having forgotten her phone, Little Bear runs out of his pen and barks up the stairs, indicating that Lalo is there. As Lalo stands around the corner of Werner's study with his silenced pistol out, prepared to kill Marguerite if he has to, he looks over and notices the slide rule encased in lucite and realizes that it was a present sent by one of Werner's boys, answering the question of the significance of it in the cold open. Not only was it foreshadowing to Lalo's return in Germany, it was the lead that Lalo needed in order to further his plans. Oh, and the episode ends with Marguerite entering Werner's study to find no one there, but that the window is open, which Lalo must have snuck out of moments before. This episode gets an A tier, which is the same ranking that I gave it when it first originally aired. Not gonna lie, it was incredibly intense watching this scene for the first time. The buildup of Lalo getting close to Marguerite, all leading up to the possibility that Lalo may kill her, was really nerve-wracking, and I'm glad she didn't die. It's crazy how much the show can get you to care for a character that has only ever been on screen for like 13 minutes or so. We've never seen her before, and we never see her again. Granted, it does help that she's a tragic character already connected to Werner, but her actor does a really amazing job in this episode, along with the fact of how much on-screen chemistry she seems to have with Tony Dalton. What an amazing way to end the episode, especially considering it finally gave us the answers to where the heck Lalo's been this whole time, since we haven't even seen him since the end of 601. Plus, saving all of Lalo's part until the very end of 605 just made the wait seem like that much longer. Now, since Lalo is such a show stealer, it was a huge risk not having him appear for 3.5 episodes during the final season, but I think the creators pulled it off well, as leaving us in the dark for so long made us wonder where Lalo was just as much as Gus did. Although we do find out about Lalo an episode and a half before Gus does, putting us in the same boat as Gus for 3.5 episodes first is way better than us just knowing for the entire 5 episodes when Gus didn't. Because there's a certain point where the viewers know so much more than the characters do that it just becomes annoying, so I think they balanced that pretty well. Now, episodes 604 to 606 weren't that well received when they first aired, but 607 to 609 seem to have completely made up for that. Again, it was probably just due to many of us wanting more action and intensity throughout the final season, especially with our expectations raised after everything that happened to Nacho in 603. However, it just shows that you gotta trust the process that these creators have, as everything did end up paying off wonderfully in the end.
What are we looking at here?
Can't rush the process.
As long as there's an image, it doesn't have to be perfect.
Can't rush the process.
Due to that, I now believe that 604 to 606 have a lot more rewatchability than when they first aired. So although I give 605 the same A tier ranking that I originally did during my rewatch, I do think that it's even better now for multiple reasons, kind of similar to how I feel about 604. Honestly, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I almost feel like I wanted to give 605 an S tier too, but it's just barely not S tier standard. Plus, I don't know if I actually like 605 more than 601 or 602, which is why I'm keeping 605 at an A tier instead of bumping it up to an S. Everything involving Howard this episode was awesome. I love the Cliff confrontation, as Cliff goes from being a caring friend to just completely clueless once Howard figures out what's going on. I feel like the boxing fight was a bit controversial when this episode first came out, but I always liked it and I still enjoy it just as much now. I think the idea of Jimmy giving an unspoken admission of guilt is extremely interesting, especially now that we know Jimmy and Kim's full plan and end goal. Howard thought that he had caught Jimmy, but Jimmy fighting Howard actually aided in their plan against him. I also think that the PI twist is brilliant, so seeing the seeds being planted that led Howard to even wanting to hire a PI in the first place is great to see in retrospect, since we now know what comes next as well. It was also awesome seeing Saul hire Francesca back, which we've all honestly been waiting for since the end of season 3. Finally, Lalo's reveal in Germany never gets old, and knowing how well it plays out for the rest of the season with Lalo's return really does make it all worth it. Season 6, Episode 6, Axe and Grind. So exactly one season later, we get another Kim flashback, with the actors who played young Kim and Kim's mother reprising their roles from the 506 Kim flashback as well. This time, the flashback elaborates a lot more on Kim's relationship with her mother, along with what her mother was like in general, and how Kim had to deal with her growing up. The flashback starts out with Kim being scolded by her mother and a manager due to trying to steal, with the mother putting on a huge show as if she's incredibly disappointed. However, when they leave, Kim's mom starts laughing and making fun of the manager manager once they're around the corner. Turns out that Kim's mom just conned the manager in order to get both her and Kim out of that situation without any consequence. This shows that not only is she not disappointed in Kim, it's quite the opposite. As they get in the car, Kim's mom tells her that she didn't think Kim had it in her, implying that Kim's mom is actually proud of her for attempting to shoplift. Kim's mother then gives her a pair of earrings, which you should probably recognize as it's the same pair of earrings that Kim has worn for the majority of the show. So it seems like Kim grew up with her mother being a con artist and a shoplifter, which is kind of crazy to think about. No wonder Kim loves conning so much with Jimmy. As we theorized as season 5 concluded, it seemed like Jimmy's cons bring a comfort to Kim that relates back to someone who was previously in her life, and in 606 we got the answer that that person is actually her mother. So in a way, Jimmy awakened the con artist inside of Kim that was always part of her due to growing up with her mother being one. It's also really interesting that both Jimmy and Kim had met a con artist from a young age that shaped them as the people that they are today. With Jimmy, it was the man who conned his father at his corner store, which is probably just one of many examples of his father getting conned, and then with Kim, it was her very own mother. Since Kim has seemed to grow up so righteous and moral considering the 506 flashback, shoplifting is very out of character for her, and I feel like her mother was definitely a negative influence on her. I wonder if this 606 flashback could imply that Kim actually started leaning into being more negatively influenced by her mother at a young age, possibly even conning and shoplifting alongside her. We know that Kim eventually decided to move away from her hometown and go down the straight and narrow and become a lawyer, so maybe her life wasn't going down a good path due to her mother's influence. That could have very well caused her to eventually decide to change back to the righteous and moral person that she always was to begin with, and to move to Albuquerque to make something of her life instead of just working a minimum wage job while being a possible con artist shoplifter like her mother.
One day I just looked around at my life, at who I was, and realized if I kept going the way I was going...
Which way was that?
Best case, probably married to the guy that ran the town gas station. Maybe cashiering down at the Hinky Dinky.
The Hinky what?
Hinky Dinky. It was our supermarket. I just wanted something else.
What did you want?
More.
Also, even though Kim has moved away from her hometown and seemingly disconnected herself with her family so much, to the point that she doesn't have any family photos in her apartment, she still keeps those earrings as a memento of her mother. And I'll actually take that one step further by saying that she probably kept those earrings as a memory of the first time that she tried stealing and conning with her mother, in the same way that she kept the bottle stopper from the first time that she conned with Jimmy. So it seems like her mother was obviously a very bad influence on her, as I've said multiple times now, which may have caused her to come to the realization that she needed to move away and fix her life. Now she seems to be repeating that same trend again, except instead with Jimmy. I love how the creators show glimpses into the past of their characters in such a way that leaves so much room for speculation and interpretation without giving the definitive moment of, this is the answer, this is exactly what shaped this character. They do give strong implications, but still allow it to be left up to interpretation for the audience to fill in the gaps. Now back in the main timeline, we get a glimpse at Howard's morning routine, which is not as cut out as it initially seems, as it's revealed that Howard is waking up in his guest house away from his wife. We actually saw Howard appear on the guest house balcony when Jimmy threw the bowling balls at his car last season, but here we actually see the inside of his guest house along with his actual house, where we meet his wife Cheryl for the first time. So just like how we heard in 604, Howard's marriage does seem to be in a complete deadlock. Cheryl seems completely disinterested from anything he has to say, doesn't want anything to do with him, and doesn't react to any kind gestures that he makes towards her.
How do you want to handle it?
Well, however you want. You could go, or I could go. Or, if it's easier, we could both go.
I'll go.
Sure. Probably for the best.
It's truly depressing to watch, and it makes me really wonder what could have ever caused the relationship to go down this path, since we're only just now being introduced to it as it's failing. As I discussed in my Saul Goodman's Worst Regret video, among other videos revolving around Howard in 607 and 608, I have a theory that leaves Jimmy indirectly guilty for actually ruining Howard's marriage. So I've already discussed it in other videos, I'll try to just run through it quick here, but in 607, Howard tells Jimmy and Kim that he's been sleeping in the guest house for the better part of a year. 607 happens in June of 2004, which means that Howard has been having marriage problems since at least the summer of 03. Although Howard mentions sleeping in the guest house for the better part of a year, that doesn't mean that that's when his marriage problems started, only how that's when they got so bad to the point that he started sleeping separately from Cheryl. Chuck died in March of 03, so it's possible that the grief and depression that Howard went through due to Chuck's death could have put a strain on his marriage with Cheryl. Not only that, but as we see here in episode 606, Cheryl's extremely cold and jaded to Howard's new namaste lifestyle, which Howard created as a coping mechanism to try and come out of the other side of his depression as a better man. Howard's marriage troubles line up too perfectly with Howard's depression in the aftermath of Chuck's death to just be a coincidence. So that, along with the fact that Cheryl doesn't seem to support his namaste lifestyle, all leads me to believe that they started having relationship problems due to the way that Howard was processing Chuck's death, along with how Howard decided to act afterwards. So not only does this all link back to Chuck's death, along with Howard's grief and guilt over the situation, keep in mind that both of those were caused by Jimmy, as he unintentionally caused Chuck's death himself, along with directly pushing the guilt of Chuck's death onto Howard. Let me know what you think about the theory, as it isn't confirmed and is just a hunch of mine. And if not, what else do you think could have caused Howard's marriage to undergo such stress in that same time frame? Also, I'll have the Saul's Worst Regret video where I discuss this in more detail linked in the description. Anyways, we move on to Howard in his office as he looks at photos of Jimmy from his PI. Since we know that the PI is secretly working for Jimmy, we now know that these photos are totally set up purposely by Jimmy, so Howard focuses on a mysterious package of money that Jimmy had apparently withdrawn from a bank, making Howard think that it's for something nefarious. I love how the creators hint at the truth even episodes before we find out, such as in this instance with the photograph of Jimmy making his supposed cash withdrawal. If Jimmy needed a large sum of cold hard cash to do something illegal, he would need to withdraw a large sum of money from a bank, as he has roughly $100,000 chilling in a duffel bag back at the apartment from his bagman job for Lalo, meaning that these photos must be a ruse in some way. We then get the return of Caldera as Jimmy and Kim visit him to get a topical drug that dilates your pupils to make you look high to drug Howard with. Caldera informs them that it won't appear on any blood tests, it'll feel similar to drinking a bunch of caffeine, and that it should last an hour or two depending on the person's caffeine tolerance. We then get a side note from Caldera as he explains that he's retiring his criminal connections gig and moving away for his true passion of just being a vet. As you may have guessed, this is also Caldera's final episode, continuing the trend of returning side characters throughout the final season, all getting at least one more final scene. Caldera then shows his coded criminal contact book, mentioning that he'll be selling it to the highest bidder. I actually did an entire video breaking down all the contacts in the book, since someone on Reddit was able to decipher the code, but there's also Ed the Disappears vacuum card in it as well. It's implied that Jimmy eventually purchases this book off screen with the Sandpiper money that he gets, since the book appeared during the 601 cold open while Saul's mansion was being searched. This not only proves how Saul was able to get Ed's contact, since Caldera is retiring and gave the contact only to Saul, it explains how Mike was never able to learn Ed's contact either. Also, the book can no doubt help Saul become the center criminal contact within the Albuquerque criminal underworld going into Breaking Bad. I like how throughout Better Call Saul we've seen every stage of Saul using Ed's card. First we see him as Gene after he's relocated, then in 405 we saw him actually using the card to relocate as Gene, and now we've seen how he gets Ed's card in the first place. We then see Kim in court with a pro bono case, and Cliff joins to watch and listen. And as a side note, Kim holds up the same Albuquerque isotope air freshener that Jeff the cab driver has in the Gene timeline, but nothing is ever correlated between Jeff and Kim, so it's safe to say that this is just a coincidence, showing that the air freshener is just a common item within Albuquerque. Also, apparently while filming this scene, Ray Seahorn didn't even realize that it was the same air freshener. So after Kim leaves court, Cliff approaches her to discuss her dreams of opening a pro bono practice. He tells Kim that he wants to recommend her to the Jackson Mercer Foundation as they're expanding west, and that some of the foundation board members are flying to Santa Fe for a lunch meeting, so Cliff wants her to pitch her pro bono practice to them. It's also interesting how Cliff asked Kim how she left things off with Howard, which may be a result of Howard acting weird once Cliff told him that he was out for lunch with Kim when he saw the Wendy fiasco. Kim gives a vaguely positive answer, and we never hear anything of it again. I think it would have been nice to have Cliff suspect Kim of being implicated in messing with Howard, but sadly nothing like that ever comes to fruition, and actually more on that at the end of the episode. So Kim goes to Jimmy's new office to speak to him and gets greeted by Francesca. Since it's been just under 2 weeks since the last episode, Francesca has had the time to completely redecorate the office to her liking. This Kim-Francesca reunion is so wholesome, as Francesca always liked Kim more than Jimmy, so she's extremely excited to see Kim and give her a tour of the new office design. At this point in time, Francesca still has that giddy spark within her that we saw from her during season 3, which will sadly fizzle out the more and more that she works for Saul. Francesca also congratulates Kim on getting married with Jimmy, but at first doesn't give context, leaving Kim confused as to what she's even talking about. It's so funny how since they got married so privately and for such an unorthodox reason that it doesn't even click with Kim as to what Francesca's talking about until she outright says it. Also, I think this could be due to this possibly being the first time that anyone has ever actually congratulated Kim for her wedding. Well, aside from maybe Craig briefly in 602, but does that really count?
Oh, Mazel tov.
So as Kim goes into Saul's office, she walks in on him and the camera crew in the middle of their photo shoot for their Casimiro body double, continuing the trend of many body doubles being used in this season. First Lalo and Mateo, then Gus and his body double at his house, and now Casimiro. Kim drakes Jimmy away to inform him of the opportunity that Cliff is giving her, but is indecisive about it due to the lunch meeting being on the same day as their Mediator con. Jimmy tells her that she doesn't actually have to be in town during their con and insists that she goes to Santa Fe. In a way, this makes Kim feel like she's just now able to start feeling excited for it, as she previously didn't think that she'd be able to go due to it clashing with their con, but again, more on that in a moment as well. The next day, we see Francesca in the waiting room that's filled with clients, and we start to see the cracks form in regard to her passion for her decor. Since the clients are fairly uncivil, they completely disrespect Francesca's new furniture in many ways, such as even smoking and putting a cigarette out on one of her new couches. Not only does this make Francesca become more jaded as time goes on, but I assume it helps her build a backbone and stand up to them by the time the events of Breaking Bad happen. Saul drakes Francesca out into the back alley of their office to make a phone call impersonating a Sandpiper resident's daughter in order to get call-in information for the Mediator con so that Jimmy and Kim can listen into their con on Howard Live as it happens. I love the way that Saul silently directs Francesca during the phone call, but it is kind of depressing to see how he pressures her into doing it in the first place. As they return back into the office, they find one of their clients taking a piss in one of Francesca's new water fountains.
I've also got a pair of water features coming for Serenity.
Whoa, stop! No, wait, don't turn around, finish what you're doing!
Again, ruining any excitement that Francesca had towards her new decor. Very quickly, Francesca is realizing that she can't have nice things around Saul's office as their disrespectful clients will just ruin everything, which is probably why the waiting room becomes so bland and lifeless by the time Breaking Bad happens.
Hey, where are you going? Clean up on aisle 9.
You clean it up.
So it's now the night before the mediation con, or what Jimmy and Kim call D-Day. So after they double check their con board and make sure that they didn't miss anything, they decide to go on a picnic date while looking at D-Day, aka the lawn beside HHM that has a perfect view of the main meeting room that the mediation will be taking place in, which is that very same meeting room that we've seen at HHM over and over again ever since the pilot episode.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Hamlin, and I won't have it!
Do you want me to call security?
It's okay, Brenda. We got it.
Since we don't actually find out that Howard's PI has been secretly working for them until the next episode, when this scene first aired, it initially seemed weird that they were able to go do this without being spotted by the PI. Just another subtle nod towards the PI plot twist next episode. The next day, Jimmy goes to his office to prepare to listen in on their mediation con, while Kim plans to drive to Santa Fe for that meeting that Cliff had set her up with. While Jimmy stops at a liquor store to pick up a preemptive celebratory bottle of Zafiro Añejo, he coincidentally notices the real Casimiro standing in line and notices that Casimiro now has a broken arm. Since Jimmy and Kim took photos of a Casimiro body double accepting a fake bribe from Jimmy, this completely ruins their plan as their body double obviously doesn't have a broken arm in their photos that were staged to be taken that morning. Jimmy freaks out, calling Kim to inform her the bad news, stating that they'll have to cancel the con and figure something else out in the future. Many people wonder why Jimmy seeing Casimiro with the broken arm at the liquor store was even necessary, and here's why. I actually discussed this in greater detail during my Kim's Bad Choice Road / Kim Ruined Her Own Dreams video, but essentially this gives Kim an ultimatum. Either cancel the con and go to the Santa Fe meeting, or cancel the Santa Fe meeting and fix the con. Just like she originally thought, she has to choose one or the other and can't have both. Since she wasn't even going to originally do the Santa Fe meeting because of D-Day being on the same day, it's pretty clear what her choice ends up being. She turns around on the highway, literally turning around to go down a Bad Choice Road, and returns to Albuquerque to help Jimmy fix the con. What's interesting about this ultimatum is it's essentially two ways to acquire the same goal. Either she goes to Santa Fe and potentially gets her pro bono practice dream job legitimately funded through them, or she forces Sandpiper to settle and uses her share of the common fund to fund her pro bono practice that way instead. So it's interesting how when given a legitimate way to accomplish her goals, she still chooses to go down Bad Choice Road and roll around in the dirt with Jimmy to accomplish them that way instead. Again, if you want a more in-depth analysis on the topic, check out my nearly half-an-hour video dedicated to it. Also, to continue my point from earlier, it's interesting how Cliff never suspects Kim of being involved with the mediation con due to the fact that she ditches the Santa Fe meeting last minute at the same time. Howard even directly linked Kim to Jimmy in 605, Cliff questioned Kim about Howard in 606, and in 607, Howard blames Jimmy for everything in front of Cliff. Many fans wondered if Cliff would ever suspect Kim because of all of this, but nothing ever came of it. But moving on, although we don't see Gus in this episode, we do see Mike as he goes to the laundromat to speak to Tyrus, who's overseeing security there. Tyrus gives Mike a hard time for removing his men from watching his own house, while still having men watching Stacy and Kaylee's house. From Mike's perspective, he's going about this by thinking from a safety perspective. Since Mike hasn't been to his own home in weeks, if he has to take men off of watching a location, he'd rather it be his own house than his family's, as keeping Stacy and Kaylee safe are obviously his top priority. But even so, even if Mike did go home regularly, I think he'd still choose Stacy's house being secure over his own. From Tyrus's perspective, he doesn't care for the safety of Mike's family, and is instead coldly thinking of it from a practical standpoint. Even if Mike doesn't go home often, Tyrus believes that Lalo is still more likely to go to Mike's house than his family's house. And I just gotta emphasize how cold that is, because Tyrus would rather have his men watching an empty house than protecting Mike's family. So Tyrus and Mike obviously get in a disagreement about this, with Mike actually boldly standing up to Tyrus, saying how if Gus has a problem, he can speak to him directly, and that if Tyrus has a problem, Mike is standing right there if he wants to make a move. Tyrus stands down, so Mike takes that as a victory and leaves. Mike then goes to the house across the street from Stacy's, as it's a house that Mike's men are using to watch over Stacy's house without them even being aware of what's going on at all. Mike calls Stacy to go stargazing with Kaylee over the phone, and out of all the wholesome Mike and Kaylee scenes of this show, this one's gotta be my favorite. This is also the final time that we ever see Stacy or Kaylee on the show, so this is kinda their returning character victory lap as well. Meanwhile, we see one of Werner's men, Casper, out in the forest near his cabin in Germany. If you don't remember who this guy is, I don't blame you, but to refresh your memory, he's the guy who told Mike that Werner was worth 50 of them during the beginning of season 5. So we see Casper chopping down firewood with an axe, foreshadowing his grim fate in just a moment, as does the name of the episode, Axe and Grind. Lalo appears, and when Casper asks if he knows him, Lalo says how they haven't officially met, which implies the moment in 501 when they were in the same room together back when Gus was having Werner's crew build that chicken freezer as a lie to hide what their true plans were from Lalo. Also the scene where Mike and Lalo met face to face, and when Lalo gave Gus a hard time about the south wall looking nice. So Casper runs away with his axe, and Lalo gives chase, but doesn't shoot Casper when he has the opportunity to, as he wants Casper alive, at least enough to be able to still get information out of him. Casper makes a few questionable decisions here, such as hiding in his storage shed instead of just continuing to run through the forest. I bet that he probably knows the forest way better than Lalo and could probably escape while causing Lalo to get lost, but whatever, I guess. So Lalo follows him into the storage shed, and as he's searching it, Casper jumps out of nowhere and hits Lalo with the axe, but Lalo's plot armor caused Casper to somehow make the decision to hit Lalo with the blunt side of the axe, sparing his life, but winding the heck out of him and potentially breaking a few ribs. Now, it's possible that Casper wanted Lalo alive as well to ask him questions, but to be honest, if a man is chasing you with a gun, maybe assure your safety first, and also self-defense. Granted, Casper isn't a cold-hearted killer the way Lalo is, so maybe Casper just doesn't have it in him to suddenly make a fatal blow, as he's probably never killed anyone before and doesn't want to start. Regardless of the excuses though, I do still think that it's a stupid move for Casper to not hit Lalo with the sharp end of the axe when he had the opportunity, as Casper not killing Lalo here proved to shorten Casper's life expectancy by a very high percent, as this now gives Lalo the opportunity to retaliate. As Lalo explains to Casper how he found him through the lucite and case slide rule that he found at Marguerite's house, he uses this moment to get the upper hand on Casper by slashing him with a hidden razor blade. Two things here. First, I probably should have mentioned that it's implied that between episodes, Lalo went to the manufacturer of the lucite slide rule in order to figure out who ordered it, which led him straight to Casper. The second point is the fact that Lalo seems to just have a concealed razor blade with him at all times in case he ever needs a hidden weapon, which I found to be a bit out of nowhere, but apparently is something that people do in real life depending on, how their living situation is and whatever the comments were saying when this episode first aired, but I digress. So Lalo manages to trick Casper into leaning in to looking at the card of the manufacturer as proof of how Lalo found him, which closes the gap between them enough for Lalo to strike him with the razor. Again, Casper definitely still should have kept his distance as to not give Lalo any openings, but considering all the nitpicks that I've been listing off in regard to Casper's actions throughout this whole situation, I suppose that Casper just sadly isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. As Lalo slashes Casper with the razor, he manages to grab Casper's axe and use it to brutally chop off Casper's foot. It's so brutal and gory that I don't think I can even really show it completely on screen for YouTube, which makes me feel like I'm discussing The Boys or something. Usually Better Call Saul isn't too terribly gruesome, making this moment just that much more shocking. So sadly it's implied that Casper doesn't make it out of this one alive, because Lalo uses Casper's final moments bleeding out to interrogate him on everything he knows about the construction that Werner's crew did for Gus, which is how Lalo learns about Gus's secret plans to create a super lab. Also, Lalo did give Casper his belt to use as a tourniquet for his leg, but I doubt that Lalo's going to be driving Casper to the hospital afterwards. So this episode gets an A tier, which is higher than the original B tier ranking I originally gave the episode when it first released. Overall, I did enjoy this episode more on the rewatch. I really liked learning about Howard's home life and seeing his wife Cheryl on screen for the first time, regardless of how tragic their relationship may be. I think that the build-up at Kim's ultimatum at the end of the episode was amazingly written, and the final shot of her U-turning down Bad Choice Road is just such great symbolism. It may hit the nail on the head a tad too much for some, but I love it. The Lalo stuff was pretty hype too, although I do gotta dock a few points for Casper's illogically written decisions throughout that whole situation in order to make the story go the way that it needed to. I'm also kind of surprised that I didn't miss seeing Gus in this episode at all, as there's just so much going on. The Francesca and Kim reunion was great, along with showing how Francesca is becoming more jaded to Saul's horrible clients, along with Saul himself. Seeing Caldera one final time was great as well, as we get the explanation for how Saul Goodman acquires Ed's contact card, along with all of his other criminal contacts that he seems to have during Breaking Bad, along with explaining why Mike never knew who Ed was. Oh, also, Giancarlo Esposito actually directed episode 606. Just like with Ray Seahorn for 604, Giancarlo did a great job for 606, and when listening to his experience directing the episode, he seems to have some great insight for the whole process. Now, Ray did admit that directing 604 was slightly difficult due to Kim having so much screen time in that episode, but Gus actually isn't in 606 at all, giving Giancarlo all the breathing room he needed to just focus on directing it. Season 6, Episode 7, Plan and Execution. The mid-season finale starts out by showing the overlooming threat this episode, which is the fact that Lalo is now back in Albuquerque. We see him casually pop out of a manhole and drive to a truck stop to shower off at. After taking an hour-long power nap, Lalo returns to the sewers and is revealed to be staking out the laundromat where the super lab location is. A few fun facts about this cold open. First off, that Lalo's power nap may be a reference to when he told Nacho in the season 5 finale that he only ever needs like a few hours of sleep each night.
Yeah, I never sleep much. An hour, maybe 2. It's enough. When it's like this, that's when I can think.
Also, the sewers that we see Lalo going through is actually a repurposed set, using the same set that they used the inside of the oil tanker from in 603. Now, after the title sequence, we cut to Jimmy rushing over to pick up their Casemiro body double for a last-minute photo shoot. I love the way that Jimmy convinces the cart pusher to hop in his car by speaking to his true passion for acting above all else.
Hey, come here. How often do we get a chance to use our craft and shine, huh? Make the kind of magic that other people only dream of.
A great moment that I also like is how at the end of the scene as they drive away, the row of carts that the guy was pushing slowly rolls into one of the parked cars in the parking lot. So we then meet up with the camera crew at their campus as the camera guy Joey gets his own standalone scene being a TA. Jimmy pops in through the doors, causing him to rush out on his class so they can do their photo shoot. Joey's probably my favorite out of the whole camera crew. I just really enjoy his just sarcastically flat demeanor. We get a great moment of him and Jimmy as they walk to meet up with the rest of the crew, as Joey practically extorts Jimmy for more money as he knows that Jimmy needs him now more than ever. Kim arrives and doubles down on helping Jimmy instead of going to the Santa Fe meeting, even though Jimmy tells her that if she hopped back in her car at that moment and sped on over, she could still make it. Kim apparently feels like this is where she needs to be, finalizing her decision from the end of the last episode. Speaking of which, returning from the last episode, this is the camera crew's final return cameo as they help Jimmy and Kim film this last-minute shoot, and there's some great final moments for the characters. The camera crew has always been a great comic relief, and here's no different. As Jimmy and Kim try to rush Joey to finish developing their photos, they lace them with the topical drug that they got from Caldera, and Jimmy rushes over to deliver them to the PI, finally giving us the twist that Howard's PI was working for them all along. I've said it before, but it's a great twist. Some were able to predict it, but most weren't, and it just shows how leagues ahead of Howard Jimmy and Kim are. Speaking of which, we catch up with Howard at HHM preparing the meeting room while helping teach a newbie how to stop a shaken up can of soda from exploding. When Howard mentions that he got the trick from Chuck, the newbie actually has no idea who he is. Just goes to show how little the employees at HHM actually talk about Chuck due to all the controversy and drama that surrounded him near the end of his career in regard to his condition, how he tried blackmailing the firm, along with his death. Howard's states that Chuck was the greatest legal mind that he ever knew, but admits how there's more to life than that. Howard's PI suddenly arrives for a last-minute update and gives Howard the laced photos of Jimmy supposedly bribing Casimiro with a large cash sum that morning. Now at this point, Howard doesn't know who Casimiro is, as he's never seen him before, so Howard doesn't realize that the photo is supposed to be Jimmy bribing their mediator until the actual Casimiro walks into the room as the mediation meeting is about to begin with everyone already there. But before that happens, Howard goes to talk to Irene, who, as we know, is the representative of the Sandpiper Elder clients. Howard actually gets her to sit in a wheelchair for added sympathy, showing that he's not above doing such things to try and win a case. While doing so, Howard starts complaining about how hot he is, implying that the drugs that Jimmy and Kim laced the PI photos with are starting to take an effect on him. And this is great foreshadowing that builds the tension, because due to this, once the meeting begins, every time that the camera cuts back to Howard, we're all just waiting for the moment when Howard's pupils start to dilate. As the meeting starts, Jimmy and Kim are revealed to be sitting in Jimmy's office listening into the meeting using the dial-in number that Saul pressured Francesca into getting for them. Now I've already discussed this mediation con to death in previous videos, but I'll still try to give my 2 cents towards it, as it's such a tragically great payoff to just everything that Jimmy and Kim have been doing to Howard all season long. Needless to say, Howard makes a complete fool of himself, just like they wanted, and in such a way where it feels like you're watching a train crash in slow motion while not being able to do anything to stop it. Howard of course has the realization, thinking that Jimmy just bribed their mediator, implying that he'll be acting in bad faith and force Sandpiper to settle. This of course isn't true, as they only want Howard to think that, so he'll make a fool of himself by disrespecting Casimiro with these accusations. If Howard were to politely pause the meeting or take a step out and calmly explain things to Cliff in private, maybe he could have gone about it in a way without embarrassing himself. However, since Howard is drugged, it's definitely altering his decision-making skills, as now he's not in his right mind due to the drugs hopping him up to feel like he's on a ton of caffeine without even realizing it. Throughout Howard's embarrassment, Cliff even keeps suggesting for them to just take a moment and step out and talk privately, but Howard just keeps doubling down on his accusations. Howard seems so sure of himself that he'll be able to catch Casimiro red-handed with his PI photos, but when his assistant returns with them, it's revealed that they've been swapped out to similar photos of Jimmy instead handing a frisbee to the sound guy in a disguise. This makes Howard look crazy, as his proof is not at all what he claims it to be. Howard starts having a breakdown over the photos being wrong, such as first lashing out at his assistant to check the office again for the correct photos, along with his pupils finally dilating as he lashes out at Aaron.
Julie, you got the wrong envelope.
That was the only one on your desk.
Look again.
Are you all right? Your eyes.
I am fine.
This is truly Howard's chicanery moment, even with him saying the line, "I'm not crazy," which may be a reference to Chuck's chicanery breakdown in 305.
I'm not crazy.
If he were schizophrenic, it wouldn't take away from the fact that the
I
defendant...
am not crazy!
Now, while the meeting was starting, the PI of course swapped the photos in order to not only get rid of any proof that Howard was drugged, but also to make him look like a fool when he doesn't have the pictures to prove his accusations. Then, when Howard finally steps out to call the PI, he realizes that the number has been disconnected. Jimmy and Kim's plan plays on the idea that once Howard realizes how he's been tricked, it's too little too late, as the damage is already done. As Howard runs upstairs to his office to try and figure everything out, he leaves Cliff behind to deal with the wreckage that Howard just caused. Both Casimiro and Rich walk out to pay their respects to Cliff while being completely baffled as to how Howard's been acting. Although Rich is a respectable man, he uses this situation to his advantage by putting Cliff in a position where he's backed in a corner and he'll have no choice but to settle, as Rich is going back on his previous offer and also lowering it by $1 million every single day until Cliff decides to settle. So Cliff runs up to meet Howard in his office to tell him the bad news, while Howard tries to convince Cliff that he's been played. I love the way that the writers give exposition through Howard's realization of it as he explains it all to Cliff, from how he was drugged with the photos, to how Jimmy and Kim got him to hire a con man as a PI, along with how the photos were swapped to make him look crazy.
My PI, Janendowski, had to have been in on it. He must have shown me one set of photos and then switched them after I left the office. When I needed an investigator to follow Jimmy, I called his fake number and his fake man. I hired a con man. I got played every step of the way.
I think that Cliff is open to the idea that Howard is right, but knows that there's no way that they'll be able to convince anyone of the truth, which is exactly how Jimmy and Kim planned it.
I know what it sounds like, but you have to believe me.
It doesn't matter. You think you're going to be able to convince them it was all Jimmy McGill?
As I said, they orchestrated this all in such a way where once Howard realized what was going on, it'd be too late as the damage is already done. This whole time we've been periodically cutting back to Jimmy and Kim giggling to themselves like little kids while Howard makes a fool of himself, and the way that they make light of the situation is absolutely sadistic, from silently joking about how they're reeling him in, to actually getting off on their plan working as they overhear Cliff concluding the meeting by admitting that they're going to settle the case. I do have a full video that I'll have linked in the description where I single out and explain the entire mediation con throughout the whole season. If you want to hear more about that, along with the long laundry list of Howard videos that I made around episodes 607 and 608, but for now let's go ahead and jump into the aftermath of all of this. But first, actually, meanwhile, as the mediation con is taking place, Lalo's been vlogging to himself in the sewers as he makes a video for Donald Audio explaining his plan to infiltrate the super lab and get proof that he needs to turn the cartel against Gus. I love the Lalo vlog segments in both 607 and 608 just due to how charismatic Tony Dalton is as Lalo. Lalo calls Hector to update him on the situation, but angrily hangs up while on hold with Casa Tranquila due to realizing that the phone line has been tapped. Lalo takes his anger out on his chair due to realizing that he just gave up his only advantage against Gus. By calling Hector, he just proved to Gus that he is in fact still alive. And this is the other payoff to what was foreshadowed with Mike's dialogue in 602.
We've got guys watching anywhere he might turn up this side of Mexico.
So thinking quickly, Lalo calls back Hector while pretending to be unaware that the phones are tapped. He does this in order to tell Hector phony information to try and trick Gus when he hears the recording. Although Lalo has given up his advantage, he's trying to spin the negative into a new positive by luring Gus's men away from the laundromat to his house where they think that Lalo will be attacking. Also, Hector isn't in the loop and he believes Lalo's phony plan to be true, but this just makes Lalo's trick even more believable as Hector angrily rings his bell at Lalo not to do what he's saying. Lalo notices how most of the men who were secretly guarding the laundromat actually leave, proving that his original plan to infiltrate the laundromat was a bad idea. Lalo truly did turn, revealing that he's still alive from a negative to a positive, since if he would have tried infiltrating the laundromat without doing so, he most likely would have been killed from far more men waiting inside than he had initially anticipated. Now most of them have left, giving Lalo the opening that he didn't even know he needed until now. We then catch up with Gus making a public appearance to donate a large check to a youth program as Mike interrupts him to show him the recording that proves that Lalo is alive. They buy Lalo's trick, hook, line, and sinker, fully believing that Lalo will be gunning straight for Gus now that he's back in town. In order to secure Gus's safety, Mike has taken most of his men off of watching low-level targets in order to redirect them into protecting Gus returning home, along with defending Gus's house from an attack. As we'll soon see, one of these low-level targets includes Jimmy and Kim, meaning that when Lalo confronts them at the end of the episode, they'll be all on their own this time instead of having Mike and or his men cover them like he was able to during the 509 confrontation. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves, as we first need to discuss the whole aftermath of the mediation con as Howard goes to Jimmy and Kim's apartment to call them out for burning him to the ground. When they get a knock on the door, they already assume that it's going to be Howard. Kim tells Jimmy that he doesn't need to answer the door, but Jimmy figures that they should just get this confrontation over with. Maybe if they never opened the door for Howard, he'd still be alive, but that's just one of the many possible variables that sadly doesn't happen. Howard brings an old bottle of Macallan with him as a passive-aggressive present, referencing how he'd always crack open a bottle with Chuck to celebrate whenever they had a career victory.
But I brought you a gift, your brother and I. We always had a meeting with Mr. McCallan after a big victory. Usually some brilliant summation by Chuck. That goes without saying.
We actually saw this in the back half of season 3 after Jimmy's hearing against Chuck, as Howard tried spinning Chuck's mental breakdown in court as a positive by trying to celebrate it still getting Jimmy suspended from the law for a year, even though that's the slap on the wrist results that Chuck didn't want, as he wanted to get Jimmy disbarred permanently.
That is a 35-year-old McCallan. I'm not going to tell you how much it cost. But don't worry, it's coming out of my end. The opinion came in. Jimmy was suspended for 12 months. This is a win, my friend. I know, it doesn't feel like it.
Anyways, Howard brought the bottle of Macallan this time not to celebrate his victory, but instead to passive-aggressively celebrate Jimmy and Kim's victory on tearing him down.
So this is for you. You earned it.
I love the way that Howard goes through breaking down every possibility as to why Jimmy and Kim could potentially have a bone to pick with him, from siding with Chuck too often against Jimmy to punishing Kim too much by leaving her in doc review. Howard has clearly already been drinking before he's arrived, and then he goes ahead and pours himself a glass of the Macallan as he continues to rightfully antagonize Jimmy and Kim for what they've done to him. Jimmy slowly quits acting innocent and starts once again giving an admission of guilt by implying that he knows what Howard is talking about as he undermines what they did, telling Howard that he'll eventually land on his feet. Howard responds by listing off many troubles that he's had to go through ever since Chuck died, including debt, depression, and his marriage falling apart, all of which are either directly or indirectly caused by Jimmy. And more on that in my Saul's Worst Regret video, along with my Why Jimmy and Kim Hate Howard video, among other Howard videos. I'll have them linked in the description, as I've said. Now, I love the way that in regard to the Mediator con, Howard isn't even surprised by Jimmy's actions, instead showing disappointment in Kim for squandering her bright future. Howard calls Kim one of the smartest minds that he's ever known, and is saddened to see that conning alongside Jimmy is the path that she decided to choose. Jimmy and Kim try telling Howard that he needs to go home, but just like with Cliff offering to take him aside earlier, Howard denies this suggestion and instead doubles down. Maybe if Howard would have just left like they told him here, he'd still be alive, but again, I digress. Howard then calls Jimmy and Kim out for their sadistic behavior, realizing that they don't do the cons and scams for the money, but that they do it because it excites them to the point that they get off on it. We've seen examples of this over and over again ever since the season 2 premiere when they first started conning together, but this is the first time that it's ever been acknowledged out loud, along with them getting called out for it. Howard's completely correct in this assumption, as we know that the only time that Jimmy and Kim ever feel frisky towards each other is due to the excitement of their schemes, along with cons bringing them back together whenever they get into arguments. Howard then states how he's going to dedicate his life making sure that everyone knows the truth, unaware that his lifespan will be cut short in just a few moments, meaning that he'll obviously be unable to execute his plans. Likewise, Jimmy and Kim have put Howard in this position while thinking that he'll eventually land on his feet, unaware that he's about to be killed before he's even given the opportunity to redeem himself. Just in that moment, Lalo appears behind Howard, and I love how they signify Lalo's arrival in multiple ways. Notice how when Jimmy opened the door for Howard, Kim noticed the candlelight flicker due to the air pressure in the room changing from the front door being opened. Jimmy and Kim notice this happening again later on, indicating Lalo's arrival. Now, people wonder how much of Howard's conversation with Jimmy and Kim that Lalo actually overheard, but I don't think it's much. I doubt that Lalo stood outside the door listening in for long before he opened it, and we know that he approaches them as soon as he does due to him appearing behind Howard just moments after Jimmy and Kim notice the candlelight flicker again. The way that Jimmy reacts to seeing Lalo behind Howard is just perfect. You can physically see all the adrenaline flowing through Jimmy's body as his PTSD acts up due to effectively seeing a ghost right in front of him. Kim never warned Jimmy that Lalo was still alive, so due to this, Jimmy and Kim both have very different reactions to seeing him return, showing fear in different ways. As Jimmy just stands there paralyzed, Kim instantly tries negotiating for Howard to leave, knowing that they're all in mortal danger, not wanting Howard to get involved, but sadly it's too late for that. Howard is in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he doesn't realize it until it's too late. Howard keeps giving Jimmy and Kim a hard time while Lalo just innocently stands there and listens, allowing Howard to continue on since Howard clearly doesn't realize how big of a threat Lalo is. That is until he notices Lalo taking out a gun and screwing on his silencer, but of course by then, as I just said, it's far too late to do anything about it, as Lalo shoots Howard in the head the second that Howard starts trying to talk himself out of the situation. During Howard's final moments, as he started realizing the true danger that he was in, he figured that he could just talk himself out of it in a civil manner, but his body hit the floor before he was ever given a chance to do so. This actually reminds me a lot of Hank's death from Breaking Bad, because just like with Walt not realizing that Jack had already made his mind up, Howard, Jimmy, and Kim don't realize that Lalo has already made his mind up. So yeah, not only is Howard's death probably the most shocking death out of the entire show, but also the biggest shock out of the entire show in general. Most previous major character deaths on this show usually only happened once the writing was on the wall, such as Nacho, Werner, or even Chuck to some extent. Howard, on the other hand, was completely out of the blue. Once Howard gets shot in the head, the way that his head brutally bashes against the table before hitting the floor with his jaw open is just truly haunting. I believe it was Tom Schnoz who had the idea to film it like that, which was a great idea as it does make Howard's death just that much more traumatizing. Also, I'm unsure if the creators have confirmed this or even mentioned it, but the way that Howard hits his head when he dies reminds me a lot of when Chuck hit his head when he fell in 209. Side note, it's interesting how Tom just so happened to write and direct both episodes 509 and 607, the two episodes where Lalo confronts Jimmy and Kim in their apartment. Apparently it's just a coincidence that it ended up like that, but I'm glad, as Tom definitely brought everything he did right in 509 into 607 to make it just that much better of an episode. Jimmy and Kim's reaction is also acted out in such a brilliant way, as they show the perfect combination of shock, fear, and remorse.
Oh my god! No! Oh my god! No!
So yeah, the episode ends with Lalo killing Howard, followed by Jimmy and Kim's reaction as Lalo shushes them, telling them that it's time to talk. An absolute banger of an episode start to finish. Oh, and remember Kim's painting that Saul ends up keeping in his mansion? The same painting that Jimmy and Kim have their con board on the back of? Well, when Howard gets shot, his brains get splattered all over that very same painting. This makes it incredibly bleak to think that Saul was okay with keeping it after it got cleaned off, along with the fact that Howard's brain splattering all over the painting can be interpreted as some, dark symbolism, considering it's where Jimmy and Kim were hiding their plans against him. This episode gets a double S tier easy. This entire episode is solid, and it's just so wild that this episode gets more and more serious as it goes on. We first start out with some lighthearted comedic moments between the camera crews. They do their last minute photo shoot, and then as the mediation meeting happens, things just keep taking a darker and darker turn. From Howard making a fool of himself to Jimmy and Kim sadistically celebrating and getting off over it, to Howard's final monologue resulting in him being murdered by Lalo in just the most shocking way. Remember how when I mentioned characters from two different sides of the show finally meeting when we discussed how Kim first met Mike? Well, as awesome as it can be, sometimes you gotta be careful what you wish for, as it could result in someone dying. Take the idea of, Gus meeting Kim, for example. Throughout the seasons, both fans and actors thought it'd be really cool for Kim to hypothetically have a scene with Gus, although that'd most likely mean very bad things for Kim's character. Likewise, although it is crazy to imagine a scene with Lalo and Howard together, as you know, that probably means bad things for Howard as well. Now, the way that Lalo takes out Howard without any hesitation as if he just swatted a fly is completely baffling and terrifying. From our perspective, Howard is an incredibly important character to the show, who we've grown to know well over the years throughout all the seasons, but from Lalo's perspective, Howard is just another witness that needs to be snuffed out. Since Lalo also probably killed Howard in order to intimidate Jimmy and Kim, it's possible that Lalo could have misinterpreted Howard for being a friend of theirs, but that's neither here nor there as the effect is still the same. Now, it's been confirmed multiple times by Tom Schnoz, who, as I said, wrote and directed this episode, that Jimmy and Kim are guilty for Howard's death. They didn't pull the trigger, but they're still guilty for it, along with the fact that Howard's death was meant to open their eyes to show them the unintended consequences of their actions. For Jimmy, Howard's death was due to Jimmy not learning his lesson from Chuck's death. He messed with Chuck's insurance, which at the time seemed like an insignificant low blow, but indirectly resulted in Chuck's death. Likewise, messing with Howard with the sandpiper stuff resulted in his death as well. For Kim, she's had blinders on and tunnel vision for what she's been doing all season long, and ever since the season 5 finale, when Jimmy even warned her about pursuing this path to force Sandpiper to settle. As we'll come to see by 609, Kim does finally come to the realization of the consequences of her actions, which she's been ignoring all season long as she's been selfishly having too much fun with their cons and schemes. She almost turned into a villain for season 6, and this Howard death is kind of getting her to snap out of it and realize what she's doing. Again, I've discussed why Jimmy and Kim are at fault for Howard's death in multiple previous videos that I'll have linked in the description, along with what the true meaning of Howard's death was supposed to accomplish. I also love the double meaning within the title of the episode. On one hand, plan and execution implies Jimmy and Kim finally executing their plan against Howard for the mediation con and forcing Sandpiper to settle, but on the other hand, it can mean a more literal sense where their plan resulted in the unintended execution of Howard. With this being Howard's final episode, they definitely did the character justice. The whole mediation con as Howard made a fool of himself was hard to watch, but in the best way possible. Throughout the seasons, ever since it was revealed that Chuck was the main antagonist and not Howard, fans have grown to love Howard more and more, which really impacts the way that he goes out in this episode. As I said, I absolutely love Howard's final monologue towards Jimmy and Kim, as he's just able to air out all of their grievances and call them out on their BS. From the mediation con to the final monologue, Patrick Fabian does an excellent job in this episode, definitely Emmy worthy in my opinion. For both Nacho's and Howard's final respective episodes, the creators wrote their exits in such brilliant ways, allowing them to show off their incredible acting. And it really shows, as the actors really give it their all for their final time in the spotlight. It truly shows how much the creators and actors respect their own characters, along with how much the actors truly bring to the table. Michael Mando and Patrick Fabian have been great throughout the whole show, but they both definitely peak during their final respective episodes in such a way that I think deserves all the recognition that it can get. This was also a great episode for the season-long trend of returning side character cameos. First there's the camera crew, then at the meeting we see not only Rich again, but Irene, which was quite the treat. And I love the little comedic moment that they give her at the mediation meeting.
Is this how these usually go?
And then of course there's Cliff and Aaron as well, although they've already been in a few episodes this season so far. So first, for a moment, I'm going to show my original episode rankings next to my new rankings and discuss the changes. 603 and 607 are both double S tier episodes, easy. They're definitely some of the best episodes of the show, and the only reason why I only gave them single S tier rankings the first time around was because I didn't even incorporate double S tier rankings into my videos at the time. I originally gave 602 an S tier, but after rewatching it, it did feel more like an A tier episode, due to not really having as much excitement over the motel shootout as I did when the episode first aired. Also, I originally gave 604 and 606 both B tiers, but during my rewatch, I liked them a lot more, and I think that they actually are A tier standard. Due to these changes, I've unintentionally given 5 out of the 7 episodes A tiers. I didn't mean for them to mostly be all the same ranking, kinda looks weird like that, but that's just honestly how I feel. I try to keep my tier list mixed as far as the rankings go, but this isn't the first time that most episodes within the same season have been given the same rank. Season 6 Part 1 is a very strong first half of the final season, with all episodes at least being an A tier standard, aside from 603 to 607, which are absolutely brilliant and definitely deserve the double S tier. So these are my new final rankings for the episodes within Season 6 Part 1, and then here's the new rankings updated with the rest of the Season 1 to Season 5 episodes. Also, as you may have guessed, since we're winding down the video only after finishing Episode 7, I will be splitting my Season 6 tier list into 2 parts, just like how Season 6 of Better Call Saul was split into 2 parts when it aired as well. This is because since this video is already getting close to 3 hours long, I think it's a good time to cut the video here and continue my tier list of the final season for Better Call Saul in the next video. This actually fits well in my opinion, since Season 6 Part 1 is episodes 601 to 607, while Season 6 Part 2 covers episodes 608 to 613, so we'll be covering those final episodes in the next video. That being said, don't worry about having to wait too long for the next video, as I do have plans to release my Season 6 Part 2 tier list relatively quickly after this video uploads, so be sure to check back on the channel soon for my final Better Call Saul tier list video for Season 6 Part 2. This was an incredibly fun video to make as we look back on the first half of Better Call Saul Season 6 now that the show is concluded, so I hope you found it as entertaining to watch as I did creating it. Thanks again for watching until the very end, as this video took a lot of work and effort to complete, even though it was a great time doing so. Also, thanks again to Established Titles for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check them out by clicking the top link in the description to help support the channel. Speaking of support, I'd appreciate a like on the video and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification to stay updated on when I post the second part of my Season 6 tier list, along with other various Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad content in the near future. Check out the Patreon or give a super thanks in the comments to help support the channel financially, but most importantly, I thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.
But I'll be back, and fair warning, there's gonna be a quiz later, probably.
What's the basis of their claim?
Cocaine.